Welcome to AURP's 2021 BioHealth Caucus meeting. I am Brian Darmody, CEO of AURP, and we welcome our members, sponsors, and visitors to our virtual conference exploring how states, academia, industry, governments, and regions are building communities of bio-innovation across the country. AURP is a global nonprofit of research parks and innovation districts sponsored by universities, federal labs, hospitals, and regions in 42 states and 12 countries. We welcome you to our BioHealth Caucus. In ordinary times, we would hold this in person before the Bio Conference, but since Bio went digital, we too went digital. Next year, we will meet in person for our pre-Bio Conference whenever Bio is holding its conference, assuming they're holding it in person, and we're optimistic about that. Today, in my home state of Maryland, the COVID-19 positivity rate was 1.2%, a new low since the pandemic began. This story is being replicated in states across the country as the amazing work of the scientists and researchers represented by our partners and researchers around the world work tirelessly to create effective vaccines in record time. We are well on our way to vaccinating the nearly 8 billion people around the globe, thanks to the work of our researchers, but also biomanufacturers, the distributors, and the frontline workers that helped in this unprecedented crisis. Last fall at our virtual international conference, AURP honored organizations and members that were involved with solving some of the issues related to the COVID crisis with our Excalibur Award, including some awardees that you will hear from today. Winners of the 2020 Excalibur Award for Response and Resiliency to COVID-19 were Bio, our partner in this event, including an address we were honored to hear from Bio CEO, Dr. McMurray Heath during our international conference, NIMBLE, the National Institutes for Innovation and Manufacturing Biopharmaceuticals in Delaware, and you will hear from Bio Delaware later on, and the University of Nebraska Innovation Campus. And you will be hearing from the Bio Nebraska later in the program. So congrats to our Excalibur Award winners from last year. Some logistics. You will be on mute during the conference with your cameras off, so no worries about our seeing your pets in the buckground, and we will handle questions through the Q&A function. Now to introduce our first speaker is Dr. Michelle Bushman, Vice President of External Affairs for Bio. Michelle.
Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you to the Association of University Research Parks for hosting today's event, showcasing the state bioeconomies. As Brian mentioned, my name is Michelle Bushman, Vice President of External Affairs for Bio, and I'm also the Executive Director for the Council of State Bioscience Associations, or CSBA. CSBA includes 47 state bioscience associations across the country. Many are joining today, and we look forward to hearing more about their powerful impact in driving the bioeconomy in their respective states. CSBA member organizations work tirelessly to build a robust bioscience ecosystem across the country through workforce development, policy engagement, and of course, economic development. It is now my distinct honor to introduce my colleague, mentor, and friend, Pete Pellerito. Pete has worked with Bio for over 26 years and leverages his experience in economic development in partnership with many of our state associations as they work together to build even more robust bioeconomies across the US. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, very much, and I appreciate the introduction. And Brian, thanks for the opportunity to present brief comments on behalf of Bio to this national audience, again, of industry, academic communities, and state and regional economic development partners. As many of you know, Bio is the world's largest biotechnology trade association. We have approximately 1,000 members from more than 30 countries. We represent companies across agricultural, environmental, industrial, and biopharmaceutical sectors, and our membership has large companies, as well as hundreds of small and emerging companies, world-class universities and research institutions in our trade association community. We stand up for science and give a voice to those on the front lines developing the breakthroughs that enrich our lives, protect our planet, and fuel our bioeconomy. For the past 2 decades, BIO has successfully focused advocacy and policy strategies to support economic development efforts in the United States. Through our work with many of the organizations represented at this conference and other complementary industries, including medical devices, computation, distribution, clinical trials, and specialized software development. Over the past decade in particular, stakeholders have an intensified and energized interest in understanding and identifying the desired sets of policy and research directives needed to encourage the continued growth and development of the industry from the most basic level of research to full-scale commercialized products. We have life science clusters, both large and small and everything in between. At the core of these clusters is a diverse community of stakeholder groups that provide the strategic research initiatives, financing, enabling legislation, state-of-the-art laboratories within both industry and university research parks, and workforce training efforts needed to successfully compete in today's marketplace of ideas. Some of the major stakeholders include, again, research centers that foster collaborative partnerships between the centers and our companies, state and regional policymakers that provide a stable and supportive, I stress supportive, public policy structure, and of course, our industry that leverages advanced research into industry needs for sustained growth. And even during the pandemic, our industry continues to grow, even as other sectors have felt the job loss impacts. An upcoming report to be released at our 2021 International Convention next week will show that our sector maintained job levels of not only 1.8 million employees nationwide, but also an incremental increase. Venture funding, again, is near all-time records, and prospects for increased federal support for agencies like the National Institutes of Health all point to continued growth for our $2 trillion applied research and manufacturing economic enterprise. Beyond the economic efforts, we believe that while we are living through one of the most challenging times in our nation's history, these have also been clarifying times. Perhaps at no other time in human history has scientific discovery moved at such a rapid pace. We are engaged in an unprecedented response to the pandemic, one that has galvanized intellectual capacity, mobilized the passion and purpose of our collaborative and synergistic community, and allowed us to organize around the most important scientific challenge of our lifetimes. The result and the pace of innovation has been breathtaking and will transform the application of science and our ability to be at the forefront of addressing the needs not only here in the United States, but around the world. This AURP national discussion will certainly generate new ideas for your economic development partnerships and reinvigorate efforts to both improve the human condition and generate prosperity for all of our citizens. We look forward to working with Autumn on these and other strategic economic development building blocks for growth in clusters large and small, and look forward to working with colleagues, of course, with our Council of State Biotech Associations and other voices in the conversation today. Again, I'm pleased to share these brief comments and best wishes to all of you, and I will enjoy listening to the conversation this afternoon. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Brian.
Well, thank you, Peter, and thank you, BIO, again, for supporting us and helping us recruit some of the members from the various states. And I appreciate your work, Michelle's, and Dr. McMurray Heath. Thank you very much. I wanted to now quickly introduce our two co-chairs of the BioHealth Caucus. Mark Romney will come on first. He's the Chief Industry Alliance Officer at UC Davis Aggie Square. Mark, give a quick overview. Not everyone knows what Aggie Square is, so could you give a quick overview and what you do there and your role with the BioHealth Caucus?
Sure. Thank you so much, Brian, and welcome everybody. So University of California, Davis has a Sacramento campus, which is focused on sort of our health areas of school of medicine, school of nursing, and the hospital. Our chancellor and the mayor brought forth an initiative to create what is now called Aggie Square, which our first phase is about a 1.2 million square foot innovation district, comprised of about 600,000 square feet of laboratory space, 300,000 square feet of office, considers more lifelong learning and then housing. My role is the Chief Industry Alliance Officer, which is focusing on obviously the industry partnerships that I've led at the university for the last 15 years, been with the university just over 30 years, and also handling more of the strategic component of it. We're breaking ground in the probably January, February of 2022, and we'll be opening up late 23, maybe first quarter 24. And for me, the BioHealth Caucus that Brian and others sort of created has been a great forum for those academic medical center-based or academic institutions that have sort of that biohealth focus or expertise. So it's a great network opportunity. And I really enjoy the connections with the other industry leaders, both from groups from bio and others, that really bring a benefit in the bonding and helping all of the innovation districts flourish. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And Rich Bendis, my other co-chair of BioHealth Innovation. Rich, you're on
Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Brian and Mark. Great to be here with another AURP BioHealth Caucus and BioHealth Innovation, and I am proud to be associated with this association doing great work around the United States and around the world. BioHealth Innovation is a private-public partnership located in Rockville, Maryland, a part of the BioHealth Capital Region, which embodies Maryland, DC, and Virginia. And we're going to hear some profiles today from some of the people within that region. John Newby from Virginia Bio and Brad Fackler talking about what's going on in the state of Maryland, which have been very active during this pandemic. Most people may or may not know that about 40% of the warp speed money to address therapeutics, vaccines, and diagnostics related to COVID-19 pandemic came into one county in the United States, which was Montgomery County, Maryland. And in addition to that, as a result of that pandemic, people within the region have come together through an organization called Connected DMV, and we're in the process of creating a global pandemic prevention and defense center. As a matter of fact, John Newby and I just left the steering committee meeting for that to come to the AURP BioCaucus meeting. So lots happening in the biohealth industry nationally as well as within our region. So we're proud to be associated with it. We're going to talk a little bit more about what's going on in our region on a panel that I'll be participating in. So I look forward to hearing a lot of the speakers today. Brian, thank you for the invitation and putting this BioHealth Caucus together.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Mark. So now we're going to immediately go into our showcase of state bioeconomies. And AURP, was founded in Arizona. So I like to 35 years ago. So we're celebrating in the Arizona sun. So I was thrilled that Arizona Bio could be our first presenter. And so with that, I'm hoping we can have Arizona Bio as our first member of the Showcase of State Bio Ecosystems to present. Is Joan on? Okay, well, then we're going to skip Arizona and hopefully they'll come back. We'll go right to John Newby. Rich just mentioned John Newby of Virginia Bio. So John, tell us what's happening in the Commonwealth of Virginia, not the state of Virginia. I know that you are one of 4 Commonwealths. So tell us what's going on with Virginia Bio.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me with you today. We are very, very proud members of this greater biohealth capital region that Rich leads. The partnership between Virginia, Maryland, and DC could not be stronger. We're doing great things here. I'm here to speak about Virginia Bio, what's happening in our ecosystem here in Virginia. And would you like for me to share my screen, or would you like to flip the slide there?
Diana, I think Diana can has them. Yes,
Okay,
she
great.
can move ahead of the slides.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Diana. I appreciate that. Our mission here at Virginia Bio at a very high level is to provide the connective tissue between our research institutions, our startups, institutional partners, connect them with sources of capital and partnerships, opportunities across the state, region, and indeed across the world, and partnerships with you as well. We have an ecosystem that has an $8 billion impact on Virginia's economy, 25,000 people who are employed in over 2,500 life science entities. What I'd like to do is give you a snapshot of each of our 5 main regions in Virginia in 5 minutes that Brian has given me. So if you can go to the next slide, please, I'd appreciate it. Northern Virginia, great activities happening in Northern Virginia. You can see here we have a fantastic lead at Northern Virginia Bioscience Center of 30,000 square feet of activity of wet lab space opening later this year, still on track to do that. An AURP member, Prince William County, has a Prince William County Science Accelerator at 10,000 square feet, a commercial wet lab space and acceleration support services already up and running. And also another AURP member, George Mason University, has a lot of activities happening there. Just a quick snapshot of what's happening at George Mason. Their biomedical research lab is one of only 13 regional biocontainment facilities in the US. They have a lot of research and development going into platforms, technologies for vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics. Lots of great activity there. And finally, the Institute for Digital Innovation in Northern Virginia, 360,000 square foot facility that'll undergo construction really soon. It'll be the future home to tech research, tech education, corporate innovation labs, and collaboration spaces for public programming. At the bottom, and you'll see the following slides also just mention of several entities and companies within each region. I'll highlight here is Ceres Nanosciences, a spin out from George Mason University. Recently received a significant $6 million NIH award to support its nanotrap particle technology to improve diagnostic testing. Next slide, please. The Richmond area, which is where Virginia Bio is, where I'm located, lots of activity happening here as well. Primarily led by yet another AURP member of the Virginia Biotech Park. It's a 34-acre campus here in Virginia, right next door to the VCU Medical School. It's the existing home to more than 70 companies, government labs, and research institutes. You can see there currently sitting in 1.2 million square feet of space here in Richmond. And the 100,000 square foot innovation building is a new add-on that's going to be built and construction should be complete by early 2022. Lots of great activity happening here in the Richmond area. Probably one big highlight here in the Richmond area as far as companies concerned in the bottom right, Flow Corporation, which in 2020 received a $354 million barter grant to focus on advanced manufacturing for APIs for COVID-19 therapies, as well as myriad generic drugs. Next slide, please. Coastal Virginia. This is actually Virginia's most populous region, led by the largest city of Virginia Beach. Lots of things happening here. In the Newport News area, the Tech Center Research Park, which is a partnership between Newport News and the Virginia Tech Center the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center, which also is a AURP partner. As you can see here, a mega activity here, 900,000 square feet of space, 10 planned buildings, 1 building with commercial lab space is already under construction, customizable, flexible workspaces to build a technology ecosystem in the Newport News area. Virginia Beach Bio, lots of things happening in the city of Virginia Beach. The Virginia Beach Research Park is 155 acres, 1 million square feet of office space or wet lab space, and also a brand new, newly opened portion, which is 5,700 square feet of commercial wet lab space at the Accelerator, just opened up this past February in Virginia Beach itself. Lots of great supporting activity. You can see at the bottom of the slide there, 757 Angels, Of course, it provides capital to many of our startup companies in the area. 757 Accelerate, the accelerator for the region for our activities. And also finally, just as I mentioned, Embody Technologies, one of my members, recently received a $9 million Series A for their next generation soft tissue repair technology, currently used by DoD and special operations. Next slide, please. The Blacksburg Roanoke area, again led by an AURP member, Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center, located adjacent to Virginia Tech campus in Blacksburg and nearby Reilly Clinic. Lots of great activities there, research across the region, lots of infrastructure that you can see outlined in graphical form at the Corporate Research Center. Couple highlights for what's happening there in the region. Landos Pharmaceuticals, they just received $60 million Series B financing round for phase 2 studies of their product for ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. Next slide, please. And last but not least, Charlottesville, very, very busy region. As far as capital is concerned, Cav Angels, Charlottesville Angel Network, you can see at the bottom, very active in our bioscience community. This region is spearheaded and anchored by UVA. The UVA Research Park is an AURP member, proudly representing the organization there. Lots of activity there you can see outlined on the screen. The Charlottesville BioHub, very important. They are a great local regional based biotechnology hub in Virginia. Lots of great companies, and that 67 companies is actually is a little bit low. I think they're north of 74 or 75 biotech and life science companies and growing, many of which have spun out of UVA. Some highlights there, Zeal Bio recently closed on a $25 million Series A funding to help enable their development of monoclonal antibody therapies here recently awarded. Next slide. So that's Virginia in a very quick 5 minutes. Lots happening here. And one more point, we have endeavored to connect our ecosystem more tightly. We have an effort here called Virginia BioConnect, funded by the Commonwealth of Virginia to the tune of $3.2 million to connect the dots between all of our infrastructure and activity in Virginia, and then ultimately connect it with folks like you to engage in partnerships to make things better for human health and improve our way of life. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, John. So now we're going to move a little north to the Free State of Maryland, and we're going to hear from Brad Fackler, Vice President of Life Sciences for the Maryland Tech Council. Brad, take it away and let's tell us what's going on in the Free State of Maryland.
Thank you, Brian. I represent the Maryland Technology Council. We are a collaborative group of nearly 500 life science and technology organizations.
Hey, Brad, I think you're on mute.
I didn't think I was.
Keep going, Brad. Yep.
Yeah, I don't think I'm on mute.
Yeah, go ahead, Brad.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We support by giving our members value through forums to learn, share, and connect through our pillars of advocacy, networking, and education. Oh. We are at the northern end of the biohealth capital region. You can see us on the map and highlighting the critical federal institutions, NIST, NCI, NIH, and FDA, along with the universities, Johns Hopkins and the University of Maryland, Baltimore. Let's look at life sciences here in Maryland. We are ranked number 4 of the top 10 US bioscience clusters by both CBRE and the Genetic Engineering Biotechnology News for 2021. There are over 500 biotech companies and 2,700 life sciences firms here in Maryland, and we have seen a 700% increase in venture funding over previous years. That amounts to $1.2 billion in venture funding. And not included in that number, but still important, is $2.3 billion in NIH grants. Maryland is a world leader in adult stem cell production. We are anchored by the two medical universities that you saw, the University of Maryland and Johns Hopkins, and critical federal laboratories, the FDA, NIST, and NIH. And NIH, by the way, is the largest largest scientist training program in the world, with over 100 PhD candidates and nearly 3,000 postdoctoral candidates. And we are supported by a network of AURP research parks, including the University of Maryland Biopark, the University of Maryland Baltimore Biopark, the University of Maryland College Park, Viva White Oak, BW Tech, and PIC MC at Montgomery College, among others. Currently, there's about 100,000 people here in Maryland that are employed in the life sciences, and we rank #1 in doctoral scientists and engineers. Here you can see another view of Maryland looking at the employment density. I call it the V, starting up here in Frederick, coming down by NIST to the FDA in Bethesda, and over across to the, that's NIH, and over across to the FDA in White Oak, and then up through Baltimore. Rich mentioned this in his opening remarks, but Maryland has played a critical role in reining in COVID-19. The Moderna vaccine got its start here, being jointly developed by the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease and the company. Gaithersburg-based Novavax is on track to submit its vaccine for early use authorization later this month. Australian COVID testing company Ellume has established its US headquarters in Frederick and is scheduled to begin producing home test kits later this month. Becton Dickinson in Sparks, just north of Baltimore, is a world leader in the supplying of PCR equipment, and Germantown-based QIAGEN is a leading supplier of genomic testing. Rich mentioned that about 30% of the Warp Speed funding went to Maryland-based companies and institutions, and about 20% of the world's top influencers in vaccine development are located right here in Maryland. So if this is of any interest to you, you can contact me here and we'll be glad to give you more information on Maryland.
Great. Thank you, Brad, for that review of Maryland. So now we're going to go a little further north to the Great Lakes state of Michigan. Michigan State University is one of our AURP members. So we're going to hear now from Michigan Bio, Stephen Rapondalo from Michigan Bio. Stephen, take it away.
All right, let's see, I can share my screen. All right. All right. Well, Brian and AURP, thank you very much for the opportunity to permit me to showcase Michigan's biosciences industry. You know, we kind of fly below the radar screen compared to probably some of the coastal biotech hubs. But nonetheless, we've had a long and storied legacy in biosciences. Michigan is home to the first two pharmaceutical companies in the country, Parke-Davis in the 1860s and Upjohn in the 1880s, followed thereafter by Perrigo, also in the 1880s. The first two, of course, became part of Pfizer. Perrigo continues to be headquartered here and in fact is in expansion mode. So we know the biosciences. We've been doing it for quite some time. I don't need to go through this slide. Everybody understands biosciences industry. We're pretty strong in most of these areas, but we also include the the preclinical informatics and the health care information technology part of the world as well, since there's so many shared products and synergies with the other traditional biosciences sectors. So here in Michigan, we've got about a total of about 145,000 that are impacted, individuals that are impacted by the industry, about 40,000 direct jobs scattered across almost 1,900 facilities. We've always been top 15 in the country in terms by size, and in recent years have grown to be 10th largest med device state. And you can see the breakout of both establishments and employment based on the different sectors. A lot of global brands that you probably recognize, a number of them with their corporate headquarters here. We've been home to many discoveries and brand products, things like Lipitor and Cisplatin, among many others, scattered across, world-class R1 research universities like Michigan State and University of Michigan, health systems, major health systems, along with the commercial side of the world. Here's the distribution of those sectors in the industry across the state. The bulk of it is in the lower half of the Lower Peninsula. And I should note that, one of the challenges that we have as a trade association is, of course, connecting literally all the dots, because for those that aren't studied in Michigan geography, if you're down here in the bottom right-hand corner of Detroit, the distance between that and the upper left corner of the Upper Peninsula is a 12-hour drive. We're widely scattered, although the bulk of it is, like I said, in the lower half of the state. I should also note, and I'll come back to this in a minute, but we've got a network of so-called smart zones and incubators around the state. Kind of perhaps hard to tell from your vantage point, given the colors, but there's a number of them here and some up in the UP, the Upper Peninsula, closely associated with university and tech centers. And the other thing that we have is a strong network of clinical trials phase 1 units, about, I think at last count, about a dozen or so. And Michigan is a top 10 clinical trials state and has been for a long time, largely because of our legacy in the pharmaceutical industry. Over the years, the state and partners from the private sector, the government side, and others have focused hard on trying to put all the pieces together to sustain our bioscience cluster and grow it, identify unmet needs across the spectrum, and a couple of things that I wanted to kind of highlight in the remaining minutes. First, I think the heart of it all is this network of smart zones. The state of Michigan put these in place almost 20 years ago. Now there's about 21 of them, and basically they're business accelerators that are closely tied with higher ed institutions in their localities and regions. And they support the launch and the growth and commercialization of companies, many of which, the predominant number, of course, are life science companies. These are all local development finance authorities, so they're funded through local tax capture. And for example, in Ann Arbor, which is probably the largest and the most mature one, this coming fiscal year, beginning July 1, we'll be capturing about $5.25 million that is dedicated solely to entrepreneurial venture support. Again, many of which are life science companies and those in the digital health IT space. But at the root of them is the incubators, because I would say in over half the smart zones, they have wet labs of one size or another. Some of the more notable ones are highlighted here. On the left, Michigan State University took over and repurposed the former Park Davis Pfizer facility on the west side of the state and turned it into their Bioeconomy Institute. So it's part production facility where they're de-risking bioeconomy projects. And on the other half or more, our incubator labs, wet labs space for new companies. And then most recently finished down here in the bottom left features a recently built incubator and accelerator in Grand Rapids, where Michigan State has established a large biomedical presence. In the middle is probably our flagship innovation center, also repurposed from Park Davis Pfizer. The Michigan Life Sciences and Innovation Center is state-owned by the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, who's been running it for the last dozen or more years. And I think at last count, I think they have about close to 40 companies, some of considerable size, along with a clinical phase 1 unit that I believe has about 15 or 20 beds for use in clinical trials. And then in other cases, like the one here on the right, parked at the Western Michigan University Technology Park, is the innovation center that's now owned by the Western Michigan Medical School. And that one is in and of itself a smart zone. In other words, the smart zone is bricks and mortar. And this is probably the first innovation center that was built from the ground up for its intended purpose. And in the bottom shot, along some of its graduates, in this case, a CRO called Collexon, has now located also within the tech park, as have others. But I guess the biggest story is here in Ann Arbor, where the former Park Davis Pfizer R&D site was shuttered in 2007. We're talking about 2.1 million square feet of office, research, and manufacturing space, because we had a GMP facility there. Across 28 buildings on 177 acres, of which the buildings themselves probably only occupy, I think, 60 or 70 acres, so plenty of room for growth. At our peak, and I say our because I was one of them, we had 3,300 employees in the R&D center. And when the announcement for closure was made a couple of years later, that had dropped already to 2,300. But now it has refilled. I think at last count, it's about 3,500 employees in a multidisciplinary collaborative environment. They've drawn upon about 17 different schools and colleges, predominantly biomedical, but it also includes their clinical pathology labs for the entire Michigan health system and so forth. And another major component is that's where the tech transfer office is headquartered. And side by side is a University of Michigan venture accelerator, where startups have access to wet labs and business support services. Michigan has worked really, really diligently to grow its investment community. We're not on the coasts where the bulk of investors are. And so we've had to kind of grow it organically. I think 20 years ago, we probably had at best a handful of homegrown capital firms. Now we're at least 24, in addition to those from elsewhere that have offices here. We have state-supported fund-to-funds, in addition to some corporate funds, and a recent model that has just started to evolve over the last couple of years have been university-based venture funds, most notably Red Cedar Ventures, that's tied with Michigan State University, and the biosciences, the Michigan Biomedical Venture Fund at the University of Michigan, which is a recent launch. And in addition, we've got a really strong network across the entire state of angel groups as well. And you see the bulk of the investment, of course, is in the life sciences, and secondly, in the information technology space, which also overlaps with health IT. time doesn't give me enough to talk about all the great other assets that we have here in the state. I'll end with, of course, our major success story, and that is Pfizer. While they may have left the R&D center here in Ann Arbor and Kalamazoo on the human healthcare side, they still have their world's largest manufacturing facility. They are in a second phase of a $750 million expansion. They just launched a $450 million phase. And of course, this is where their vaccine is being produced and shipped out of. But I should note that they're not, while they may be the most significant player in the vaccine production space here in Michigan, they're not the only ones. We've got other CDMOs like Grand River Aseptic Manufacturing, Endo Pharmaceuticals, Par Sterile Systems, Emergent Biosolutions that are also contributing to the effort with some of the other vaccine manufacturers. So I'll stop there. Happy to talk offline with anybody, but we'll stop there. And also a quick shout out and thank you to the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, who's really been the catalyst behind putting a lot of these resources and programs and initiatives in place.
Great, Stephen. There's a lot of good stuff going on in Michigan that, frankly, I wasn't. But it's great how Pfizer, repurposed and Michigan was able to take it over, and you have the growth of biomanufacturing. And hopefully, we're going to talk a little bit about federal initiatives, whether it's in R&D or manufacturing, later on in our session. So we're going to take a break from our state showcase. And we're going to talk a little bit on the policy side, and we're going to have a discussion with some folks from the National Academies on their report, Safeguarding the Bioeconomy. I happened to be in DC when they presented their report. It was like a week before the pandemic began. And I read the report, and it was the first time I read about Moderna, but it was a prescient report, especially now, given the impacts of cyber attacks on pipelines, on meat production, and I think the National Academies is warning us about we need to safeguard the bioeconomy. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Andrea Hotchkins from the National Academies. And Andrea, are you online?
I am here.
Okay, great. And Tom Conley, Executive Director and CEO of the American Chemical Society, and he was the lead investigator, I believe, on the Safeguarding the Bioeconomy report. So I will turn it over to the two of you to give us a summary of that report. Okay, Andrea, do you have your mic on?
Sorry,
there you go.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear
Brian,
you. Yes.
I'm Tom Conley, as
Yes.
you've already introduced
Yes.
me, and I was the study chair for this study.
Mhm.
And you can see the title here. Our role, the goal of this study was to develop strategies for understanding, evaluating, and protecting the bioeconomy while sustaining innovation and growth. Our sole sponsor was the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. We had a large and broad and daunting statement of task, so we had a good sized committee to go after it. So Andrea, if you could forward that. Here's the makeup of the committee. In terms of training, we had people trained in the life sciences, physical sciences, engineering, computer and data science, the law, security, economics, and policy, as well as communications. And people that had actual work experience in corporations, large and small, in government, in academia, in national laboratories, and non-government organizations. We completed the study, as you pointed out, just before the pandemic hit, we came up with 9 recommendations and a few subpoints from the study, and you'll get a chance to see many of them in the course of this presentation. Move on to the next chart. The impetus for the study really goes back a decade or more to another study by the National Academy of Science called The New Biology for the 21st Century that talked about the growing power of biology, particularly when linked with engineering and computational capability, but it also pointed out economic benefits, economic and social benefits in the areas of food, of health, of energy, and of the environment. And this became the basis a few years later to the study, or the blueprint as they called it, coming out of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy that covered some of the same ground in terms of linking biology to economic benefit, but it got more detailed in terms of understanding how to advance products to market, removing of regulatory barriers, how to prepare a workforce for the new opportunities, and also stressed the importance of public-private partnerships. Now, in the intervening years, there have been a number of studies that looked at one aspect of the bioeconomy, one sector of the economy that was benefited from the new biology, but there haven't been any studies that looked at the bioeconomy in totality until the study that we're talking about today. And although the next chart really did not appear at any point within the report, there were certain overarching themes, recurring themes from the report that are worth mentioning here. First, and I've already mentioned it, is the transdisciplinary nature of the bioeconomy. Life sciences, working with physical sciences, engineering, automation, data and computer sciences all come together as the drivers of the bioeconomy. Secondly, the need, if we're going to protect the bioeconomy, we need to be able to measure it and track it. And this turned out to be a more difficult task than we imagined as we went into this study. And third, and very importantly, was the need to balance security considerations with openness. As a society, the US is opening and welcoming by our intent and by our preference, and we have benefited tremendously from this openness. Economies move forward, science move forward when there's free movement of ideas and people and technologies and goods. And yet we recognize that there are certain threats to our bioeconomy that need to be protected against. And striking that right balance between openness and security was important to our study. And finally, the need for coordination across the disciplines I've already mentioned, across certain sectors, the economy, from human health to agriculture to industrial, to coordination amongst the government agencies, science agencies, security agencies, regulatory agencies, economic agencies, with at the moment no clear lead amongst them. And finally, coordination amongst like-minded countries that are all working to advance their bioeconomies. So we needed to define, first of all, what we were going to protect. And so to provide a little context around that, I mentioned we have economic activity that's spread across many of the traditional sectors of the economy. And in order to measure the economy, we needed to decide what's in the bioeconomy and what's not, and on what basis we would either include or exclude things. And we found, doing a quick survey of the nearly 60 countries that have what they consider a bioeconomy, very different approaches to defining it. Some took a biotechnology approach and vision as they describe their bioeconomy. Others took advantage of their bioresources. So if you're Brazil, you're going to include production. Agriculture is a big sector. If you're Finland, forestry products are going to be important. And finally, some countries took a bioecology vision. So Costa Rica includes ecotourism within their vision of their bioeconomy. So what was the approach that we were going to take for our study? And that led to the definition shown on the next chart. First of all, with regard to the criteria that we would choose, we wanted to pick a definition that would enable us to develop the strategy and do the measurements and develop the metrics that we wanted, but we also wanted a definition that was flexible enough so that it would allow for expansion of the bioeconomy going forward. And this led to our recommendation number 1. And you can see the definition in the bolded paragraph at the bottom right. And I'll read that definition. The US bioeconomy is economic activity that is driven by research and innovation in the life sciences and biotechnology, and that is enabled by technological advances in engineering and in computing and information science. So we took that biotechnology vision as the basis for our definition of the bioeconomy. And let's see how that plays out on the next chart. And you can see here the exercise we went through to say, well, what's in the bioeconomy and what's not? And shown on the left are the large sectors, agriculture, biomedical, bioindustrial, and we added a category called tools, kits, and services. So what's in that? So certainly the services, the gene analysis that you can, the genome analysis that can be carried out over the, by submitting samples is included in that. Other services, DNA sequencing or DNA construction, or the kits that are used to supply reactants or reagents for biochemical reactions. We even included services such as, I would say, the patent lawyers. If you're doing biotech patents, the services provided by those lawyers are part of the bioeconomy. Consumables, those ubiquitous 96 well plates, they're all part of the bioeconomy because they exist because of the research effort. So in the center column, you can see as we did that sort of the economy, these were the sectors that were either wholly included in the bioeconomy or partially. So all of biotech R&D was included, all of pharmaceuticals we included, some medical diagnostics, some electricity generation, a lot of crop protection, and you can see the list going there. And then we added the column on the right. These are sectors that by and large are not included in the biotech economy. Livestock and aquaculture are not conducted making use of biotechnology traits and techniques. Neither is forestry today, but for the future, we could see the increasing use of biotechnology in these sectors, at which point they would be included in the bioeconomy. So we now have a definition, we know what's in, we know what's out, and we set off to measure the bioeconomy. How big is the bioeconomy? So we've tied it to innovation and commercialization. It cuts across so many sectors, the agriculture, human health, industrial applications, for examples. And how are we going to measure that? Well, the US government doesn't collect data based on the bioeconomy. They use a system called the NICSCOs, the North American Industry Classification System, to decide what's in the bioeconomy and what's not. And so what we need to do is to tease the biotech-enabled portion of all those sectors of the total economy to understand what the biology is contributing and what parts should be in the bioeconomy. We also had the difficulty of saying that there are some products that can be produced either biologically or by conventional chemistry. You're producing an ingredient for a polymer, it can be made chemically, but what if we're using a biological route via fermentation to produce that material? In one case, it should be included in the bioeconomy, and in the other case, it shouldn't. So we came up with a number of recommendations to collect data in a way that makes it easier to evaluate the bioeconomy, but we wanted to come up with a number. And so our economists on the team did, through their careful analysis, say that direct contribution is that $400 to $600 billion number. But if we look at the indirect contributions and the induced effects, we're talking at a number between $1 billion and $1.4 billion. And keep in mind that at the time we were doing the study, we were using 2016 data, so that number would be substantially larger today. So if we could move on to the next chart, Andrea. I'd just like to make a few comments and observations. U.S. has clear leadership in key areas such as synthetic biology and the ecosystem around innovation in the bioeconomy. And that was demonstrated, I think, by the strong performance of US-based research organizations in producing vaccines in response to COVID pandemic. Secondly, we need to continue to build on that leadership because other countries are not standing still, and really to maintain the leadership in our bioeconomy and everything that we have that supports it. So we need to, that led to recommendation number 4, which says, yes, we need to prioritize our investment in R&D and the related sciences and engineering, computer science, et cetera. We need to work on development of our workforce as well. And on that note, I think I turn the floor over to Andrea to talk about how to protect the bioeconomy. So Andrea, why don't you take it away?
Great, thanks, Tom. So we were also tasked with assessing the risks related to the bioeconomy, and the committee, we sort of organized the risks into 2 different categories: a failure to promote the bioeconomy and a failure to protect the bioeconomy. And you can see the 2 categories, promote being on the top here and protect on the bottom. And so as Tom mentioned, throughout all of these discussions, we were consistently trying to stress the importance of finding the right balance between protecting the US bioeconomy and not unduly impeding innovation. And so as you go through the report, you'll see that sort of consideration throughout the entire risk section as well. So as you can see on the screen, the number of different risks we identified, I'm only going to highlight 2 on this slide, but we're happy to take questions on any of the others during the Q&A. So from this slide, I'm going to highlight, just for example, the asymmetric research constraints. We know that constraints on research, such as limiting or preventing US researchers from conducting certain types of experiments or accessing particular materials or samples, could potentially provide incentives for US researchers to seek other sort of regulatory environments in which to conduct their research and potentially put the US at a competitive disadvantage. From the failure to protect side of things, we know that in the United States, we consider the financial sector, the electrical power grid, transportation systems, energy systems as part of critical infrastructures. And to the extent that innovations within the bioeconomy are going to start to integrate the bioeconomy with these critical infrastructures, or as we saw in this last year during the pandemic, the importance of the research and development supply chain related to gloves, pipette tips, and reagents for assays and diagnostics, any disruption to these key bioeconomy facilities or supply chains or services poses a potential risk to security, public health, or public safety. And so those are just 2 risks I'm going to highlight on this slide. And then we had, we sort of grouping some of the risks that we identified related to cyber and data considerations. This was a major part of our task that we were asked to focus on. We found that the bioeconomy is vulnerable to the same cyber vulnerabilities present in other sectors. However, there are particular aspects of the cyber physical system, such as the sort of control of different equipment pieces or access to laboratories that pose potential different sort of risks than we see in other sectors. Also, that the bioeconomy is really reliant on, and the research ecosystem is really reliant on the use of open source software, which is not often updated or maintained or checked in any sort of systematic way. And so the committee identified a number of these recommendations on the slide here related to adopting best practices for securing information systems, the importance of recognizing the importance of databases of biological information, and then the need to sort of invest in the modernization, but also the curation and integrity of these databases. The committee also discussed the use of information sharing and analysis centers, and whether this would be recommending that the bioeconomy stakeholders consider either pursuing membership in an existing one. There isn't one that quite at the time covered all aspects of the bioeconomy, but there is one in the health sector, or consider creating their own that would be specific for bioeconomy needs. And we've recently learned that such an organization has just been started, and they're going to have a formal launch later this summer, but you could visit their website to start to learn more about them at isac.bio. So then when we think about some of the other risks, we identified risks related to what we called here economic attack, but this relates to the use, the sharing either by theft or misappropriation of trade secrets, confidential documents, but also knowledge and technology that may be transferred through the academic misconduct. I'm sure everyone has seen the news over the last few years related to concerns about foreign researchers in US facilities. And so keeping all these conversations in mind, the committee recommended that we do our best to attract and retain scientists from around the world. They contribute to the strength of the US bioeconomy. But as we consider policies that mitigate any of these sort of potential economic or security risks, we have our security and our science agencies working closely together and also interacting with recognized leaders of the scientific community so that we have a full understanding of the potential implications of any of these policies on innovation and on the ecosystem itself. And then the last risk we wanted to highlight that relates to a recommendation is the involvement or state involvement in business activities. And so we know that there are sort of outside of the US state-directed economic programs interested in investing in US companies to gain access to intellectual property. And we've also seen state-directed investment opportunities that have the potential to distort global markets. And so given those considerations, the committee recommended that the US government convene representatives from the science and economic agencies to work closely together to identify aspects of the global value chains that are vital to the US bioeconomy, US interests, to ensure that we have secure access to those in times of needs. And I think in the last year, we've seen, again, examples of that, but also to assist the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, the CFIUS, in assessing potential transactions involving foreign entities into the US bioeconomy so we can be aware, and we are fully aware as those transactions are happening, of potential implications. And so I think with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tom to finish off the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. And if you could move directly to the next chart, if you would. All right, so I hope from my comments and those of Andrea, you've got the impression that the US bioeconomy is large, it's valuable, it's growing fast. It's an area where US has a clear leadership in aspects of it, and it's marbled throughout the broader economy. And for all of these reasons and others, it calls out for oversight and coordination. And as I've already mentioned, there is no obvious government agency that has the lead for the bioeconomy. And this led to our recommendation number 3, that the Executive Office of the President should create a government-wide coordinating body to provide oversight and bring together the science agencies, economic, regulatory, and security agencies to provide that insight and foresight required. And specifically, one of the tasks of the coordinating body would be to develop a living strategy using a process that's known as horizon scanning to maintain in an evergreen fashion a view, providing that market insight and foresight and combining it with technology insight and foresight to help guide decision making for the US bioeconomy. And if we could move on to the last recommendation that I'd like to talk about today, and this really speaks to the international dimension of openness, and that is that the US should, working on a bilateral basis or a multilateral basis through organizations such as WTO and OECD, should engage in discussions and collaborations with other large players in the bioeconomy to drive economic growth, to reinforce international governance mechanisms in frameworks that respect intellectual property and the sovereignty of nations, and frankly, create a level playing field for the countries who want to participate in the global bioeconomy. And I'll bring our comments to a close with the next chart. I'd just like to thank, in closing, my fellow committee members, Andrea, and that dozen members of this staff representing 6 or 7 different units within the National Academies, and the literally hundreds of reviewers, speakers, and members of the public that attended. And finally, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, who was the unique sponsor for this effort. And on that note, I think Andrea and I would be happy to take questions if time allows.
So, Tom, that was great. Unfortunately, we're running a little bit behind, so I'm afraid we're not. I'm going to ask one real quick question. And by the way, this is free, right? This is downloadable on the website, and so I would urge anyone. It's a great report. As I said, it's prescient because so many issues that they sort of indicated, are coming to the forefront. So, what if this were report were done after? Right now, after the pandemic, do you think it would change radically, or it seemed like you anticipate a number of things, but would this report have any different conclusions if this was done now versus, a year and a half ago?
Well, I'll take the first step, but I want Andrea to have a chance as well. I would say not much would change. I wish we had got some of these things done faster. That's the only thing, but we talked about the vulnerability of supply chains. We talked about the importance of public acceptance of biotechnology as perhaps a gating factor in our ability to really realize the benefits of it. So I don't see many things that we would change, and we're seeing a lot of interest as we end near the end of the pandemic and having briefings such as this. But Andrea, please, you're very close to that. What do you think?
Yeah, I was going to answer similarly. I'm not too sure how much would have changed, but I think the nature of our briefings and follow-up discussions would have been slightly different in the immediacy of delivering the report. As you mentioned, Brian, earlier, it came out in January of 2020. And so it's this January and all of the spring, we have been actively engaging with different U.S. federal agencies who are showing renewed interest. So there's initial interest in the report came out, but now there's a sort of renewed interest in understanding the connections, because I think everyone has a much closer to home example of the importance of the bioeconomy, unfortunately, through the events of the last year.
Well, great. Well, I urge our listeners and others, to definitely download that, take a look at it, and hats off to the National Academies for, for what you did, and hopefully, with a lot of the things going on in Congress and with the agencies, we can get some of these policies. And I remember the NAICS codes, and there wasn't one for biotech when I was, confused by it. But anyway, great. With that, thank you very much. And so now we're going to move on to our sponsor remarks. We're going to take a kind of a break, and our first sponsor, I would like to introduce is Michelle Reilly, President and CEO of the Economic Alliance of Greater Baltimore. You've heard from the Maryland life science folks, but now Michelle's going to talk about what's going on in the Greater Baltimore area. So with that, Michelle.
Great, thanks, Brian. And as I unmute myself, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that my dog doesn't start barking anytime soon. As Brian mentioned, I'm CEO of the Economic Alliance of Greater Baltimore. And as the name implies, we're a regional economic development organization. We focus on Baltimore City and 6 surrounding counties: Cecil, Carroll, Hartford, Anne Arundel, Howard, and Baltimore counties. Our organization convenes government, industry, and education to foster economic development through marketing in Baltimore City. We recognize Greater Baltimore as a world-class market in which to do business, live, learn, and invest. And through our regional and out-of-region marketing platform, we endeavor to shine a spotlight on the many economic assets in the Greater Baltimore region. We do not lobby. We do not develop policy papers. We market the economic development assets of the region, first, foremost, and only. Our digital marketing initiative targets other cities and regions with similar industry strengths, cities and regions that we believe we can compete with to attract talent, capital, and new business. We've created a number of snackable, what's called, new term for me, snackable videos, literally 15-second videos that are on YouTube that are linked to our landing pages for some of our premier industry sectors, including biohealth. And at the end of my short conversation here with you all, you will see the video. In addition to life sciences, biohealth, and healthcare, and all of the other subsectors like digital health that come under that category, Our other industry sectors are those that provide the growth opportunities for our 7 jurisdictions. Healthcare and life sciences, I mentioned, cybersecurity, IT and data, manufacturing, logistics, agriculture and energy, and a few other categories. I mentioned digital health, military and the defense industry, and higher education are among other areas that we track and market as assets for the region. I was happy to hear the presenters from the National Academies before I got online talk about engineering and computer science as other interrelated disciplines that are important for biohealth. Because what we find is no matter which of the industry sectors I mentioned, including manufacturing, logistics, and agriculture, technology is transforming the way those industries are growing and moving forward. I moderated a conversation this morning about the importance of 5G technology in the manufacturing process. So the fact that technology is moving so quickly requires all of our industry sectors to keep pace as much as possible. We have long been, we being Greater Baltimore, long been a hub of research in the life sciences. We benefit from unparalleled access to federal resources, and we're home to 3 of the top life science universities in the country: the Johns Hopkins University, University of Maryland, Baltimore, and University of Maryland, Baltimore County, all of which anchor world-class bioparks. These resources anchor a scientific community that feeds a robust pipeline of talent to bring innovation out of the lab and into the marketplace. Along with the renowned Johns Hopkins and University of Maryland medical systems and a vibrant ecosystem of life science companies, Greater Baltimore's research scientists have been at the forefront of the global fight against COVID-19. And others have spoken about the role of our industry, particularly throughout Maryland, in fighting COVID-19. I'm going to now ask Vicki, to show you the very, very short video. It's 15 seconds, so don't blink. So the message that we want to convey in these very short, like I said, 15-second videos, and getting people to click on the link, from the YouTube, it is that you can grow your company from 2 people working, at one lab bench, attracting capital and enabling them to grow and add more individuals, more research, et cetera. You move into bigger space and then become a growing biotech company. So that's the message we're trying to convey with that very, very short video. We also have short videos for cybersecurity and logistics, but I don't think you need to see them. But I think how I wrap up is that Maryland is a great place for the entire biohealth industry. And Greater Baltimore's assets are very, very significant. We collaborate both with Rich Bendis and the Biohealth and Innovation, as well as with Marty Rosenberg and Brad Fackler and others at the Maryland Tech Council. So if you have any questions, my email address and other information about the Economic Alliance of Greater Baltimore is in the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, EAGB, for being a sponsor of the Biohealth Caucus. So now we're going to move on to Fitzsimmons Research Park, and we're going to hear a presentation by April Giles, Vice President for Business Development at Fitzsimmons Innovation Community. April, welcome to the AURP Caucus meeting.
Thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate being here with you guys today. I think the FRA were members way back when, and I just joined the team about 2 years ago. So I'm excited to be back in the network of AURP and joining you guys for the Biohealth Caucus. Look forward to meeting you all, hopefully in person in October in Utah. So I'll just give a little bit about who we are, and then look forward to sharing more offline with anyone who has additional questions. So the Fitzsimmons Innovation Community is located in Aurora, Colorado. We sit in partnership with the Anschutz Medical Campus. That campus houses the 6 professional schools, 2 hospital systems, so UC Health as well as Children's. The VA is also on our campus. And then literally across the street is the innovation community. So like many of you, we leverage the assets across the ecosystem here to drive life science innovation. Our partners on campus see about 2 million patients a year, train about 4,500 students annually, and have a workforce of about 25,000 in total. We so far have developed a little over 500,000 square feet of life science infrastructure. We have about 80 companies currently in our community, and we have about 50 acres left to develop, all focused on life sciences. So, you know, certainly adjacent technologies for sure, but not too adjacent. So no clean tech, no aerospace, just purely focused on this one industry. And then we look to break ground on our next building in about 2 months, which will be a cell and gene therapy manufacturing building. As we all know, there's a high level of demand across the nation for manufacturing in this technology area. We are already in conversations with the company that will likely take the full building. So then we're in design phase for our next building following this one. So looking for an accelerated pace on the campus. Again, excited to get involved with AURP, and hopefully again see you guys in October. That's it.
Great, thank you, April. And again, thank you for helping sponsor our BioHealth Caucus meeting. So now we're going to pivot to our friends from the West Coast. Art Boney, who's the Distinguished Career Professor of Entrepreneurship, Emeritus at the Tepper School of Business at Carnegie Mellon, and Moya Gunn, Director of Bioentrepreneurship and Associate Professor at the University of San Francisco, and formerly host of NPR's Tech Nation and Biotech Nation. So, and joining us will be Rich Bendis from BioHealth Innovation. And Art and Moya are editors of the Journal of Commercial Biotechnology. And earlier this year, they produced a publication that focused on building and leveraging innovation ecosystems and clusters, universities, startups, accelerators, alliances, and partnerships. And Rich and I were lucky enough to get our paper talking about the biohealth capital region. But in the article, in the journal, there were a number of articles across the country about the growth of bioecosystems in places like Pennsylvania and California and elsewhere. And so with that, why don't we have Moya introduce herself and give a little bit more background than I did, and then we'll have Art do the same, and then Rich and I can come in and we can have a conversation. So Moya, I'll start with you. Can you give a little bit of background on your career and how you ended up at USF and what you did before that?
Well, frankly, Brian, I have to tell you, my entire life was overshadowed by the fact that no one can pronounce my name. I just wanted to put that out there. Unless you watch Schitt's Creek. And then in Schitt's Creek, Moira Rose. I mean, the whole thing is everybody can say it. This little town, everybody says Moira. They have signs constantly held up. They all spell it correctly. This is an inside joke. God only knows what other inside jokes. And so it's, you can say girl and boy, Moira, Moira. So I get a lot of Dr. Guns, which isn't bad, but it's an overship. You know, it's like I had 2 sons, and thank God for that. Lucky for them, I didn't name them Joe and Bob or something. You know, but at any rate, this has been a very interesting road for me. I actually reflect a lot of what I've been hearing in the seminar, and that I have a lot of different backgrounds coming into this. My graduate degrees are in computer science. My PhD is in mechanical engineering. I don't know how I got over to the biosphere, but you know, who doesn't have DNA? But the truth is that many parts of this entire journey, if you will, from the lab bench to a commercial product, have many disciplines in them. No one can have it all. And yes, for the last 20 years on NPR, I've hosted Tech Nation and its regular segment, Biotech Nation. That's about 15 years old. Before it was fashionable, we've done that, focusing primarily on that journey from the lab bench to the commercial product. And I'm also now an associate professor at the University of San Francisco, and I direct bioentrepreneurship. So I'll be talking a little about some of the papers in here that direct to that idea of how do we support bioentrepreneurship. And with that, let me turn it over to Professor Bonney.
Thank you, Maura. My name is a little easier to pronounce, at least the first one. Bonnie is butchered a little bit, but that's okay. I am, as advertised, an emeritus professor at Carnegie Mellon, where I ran the entrepreneurship program for many years. But more importantly, I've flunked retirement twice. And my last incarnation is as the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Commercial Biotechnology, where I'm have a pleasure of working with Maura pretty regularly. My expertise in this area it is similar to the background that Maura has. My background is in mechanical engineering, engineering physics, et cetera. And I got into the bio field later. My expertise in entrepreneurship was developed in San Diego, in Boston, in the Bay Area, and in Pittsburgh. So I've been around the country a bit, and have really experienced personally both mature ecosystems, emerging ecosystems, and nascent ecosystems. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, went to Carnegie Mellon, left there because I didn't want to work in the steel and coal industry. Moved to San Diego and spent a number of years there. I did my PhD there at UC San Diego. And I also really discovered at that time that I really was an entrepreneur. I joined a small company at the time called SAIC. We built it into $1 billion organization. It's since gone on after I left, not because I left, to become even bigger than that. I moved to Boston, and because I really wanted to start doing startups on my own. And I did a handful of them there. After doing that for about 15 years, I moved to Pittsburgh to head up the Office of Technology Management at the University of Pittsburgh. I retired from that job and moved over to Carnegie Mellon, where I ran the entrepreneurship program for about 16 years. And I have since taken emeritus status, moved to Napa, just up the road from Maura, and love being here, and I'm editing the journal. So that's basically a little bit about me.
So before we jump into some discussion of the articles, I wanted to ask, how did NPR, I mean, this is when Car Talk was on, I remember listening to you. Who came up with the idea of, because that's not a natural, I mean, business press has really grown, but that was, probably unusual to have Tech Nation and then to pivot to Biotech Nation. That was, early on, that was, you were one of the early adopters. How did you convince NPR to do that? I'm just curious.
Well, the first thing is I'm one of the few shows under contract to NPR where I own the show. And, like,
So you
and I'm
convinced
always saying,
yourself.
what do you want me to do? And they go, just keep going. Keep going. I think I have to tell you that I didn't mention this, but my early career after I got out of graduate school was at NASA. And NASA is a place where you only do things that have not been done before. So you learn that creativity and thinking of new things and innovating is a habit. And so I happened to run into a guy I went to college with that was still at the university, you know, running the radio station. He didn't get very far. And I said, don't you want to do a show on technology? And I said, sure. And I said, well, if God didn't make it, it's technology. So it could be anything. So we got that. And then we got a lot of coverage. And so I moved as an independent producer to NPR. And then after several years, they put me under contract. And this December 31st will be exactly 20 years. So we're really pleased with that. But let me tell you something. Besides building the NPR audience and building a global audience, once you have a show, you can do anything within it. So adding in biotech was an easy move in that regard. Most people can't really do that. You know, they're trying to pitch a biotech show. I think if I pitched one today, it wouldn't go anywhere. But because we can add it in, it could be very popular and you can get the distribution. And so, you know, I've just always done a lot of things. I've been in human nutrition research. I've done a whole lot of things. And I have no idea what I'm going to do next, but I have to keep talking to Art because he has a lot of good ideas. That's my story and I'm sticking to it.
And Art, it sounds like, you know, starting a journal in commercial biotech. I mean, did you start it? I mean, that sounds like a start.
No, I did not start it. Reilly Friedman is the current publisher and founder of the journal. And I met Reilly very early on and actually started publishing in the journal probably 10 plus years ago. And when I, quote, retired, I contacted Reilly and said, boy, I'd really like to affiliate somehow with the journal, but I don't want anything too serious. So he said, well, or time consuming. So he said, well, why don't you take over as an editor at large? You'll have no responsibilities. You can do whatever you want to do. So I started developing special editions for the first year or so, and then took over as editor-in-chief about 2 years ago now. And we're continuing with the special edition focus. Not that I mean, for those of you who aren't familiar, it is a quarterly international journal, peer-reviewed, and we have early on, it was all contributed papers over the transom, and now we're probably 3/4 special editions and 1/4 just over the transom submittals.
So this special edition, this last March, I believe it was focused on these universities, accelerators, partnerships.
Yes, basically what we decided to do was to do a special issue as you've advertised around this topic, because the ecosystems are so important to not only this community, but to any community. And a lot of people just don't have a good understanding of what ecosystems are or what clusters are. And that's what we decided to focus on. And we're going to be going through in a little bit more detail what's in that issue. At the end of that, we're going to say we're going to have another issue coming out, because things were moving so fast with COVID that we really saw the benefit not only of building strong cluster ecosystems and clusters, but also having them interact with each other, not only nationally, but globally. And so that's where we're heading. So that's basically what we're up to here.
All right, well, why don't you talk a little bit about the articles? And I'm going to bring in my co-chair, Rich Bendis, who's going to talk about our article and, which
Right.
focus on one region. But why don't you give a summary of some of the other articles that were in that special edition? Because I think it's of interest to our audience, and
Yeah.
I'll give you a plug. You can purchase this online. Is that right, Art?
Yes, it's volume 26, number 1. We are quarterly, and that's in 2021. And stay tuned for issue 3, which will be coming out soon, which will be focused on building global alliances, as well as collaborations between regions within countries. So that's what's coming. In between, for those of you who are interested, Q2 volume will deal with basically recognizing and celebrating innovators and innovation. We're creating a hall of fame of innovators in the bio area that have basically created our industry. And we're recognizing a number of companies for their innovation, both large companies, medium companies, and startups. So that's a little bit about where we're going. I was going to talk just a tad about, I think everybody in this audience probably knows what an ecosystem is, and I don't really need to get into that. Some people get confused between an ecosystem and a cluster. I sort of look at it that the ecosystem is the overall broader structure, and the cluster is basically perhaps industry focused within a particular community. We talk about in the article what I would refer to as the super ecosystems, which everybody refers to: Boston, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, San Diego, the emerging Mid-Atlantic region, if you will, that you all are residing in. And then some of the emerging areas like Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. We have articles on each of these in the journal. And what I refer to and the VCs refer to as the flyover regions, which is everything in the middle, where the VCs fly over to get from Silicon Valley maybe to Boston, but that's about it. And those are the regions that are struggling, if you will. So one of the things that I'd like to just very briefly go through before I turn this over to Maura is what makes ecosystems successful. And I'm sure Rich and Brian will talk a little bit about this when they talk about their article. But basically, there are 6 or 7 factors that are key to basically embrace and reward the entrepreneurial culture, have strong leadership, a shared long-range vision, a key building block, and all of these, and you guys know this better than I do, are strong universities, world-class hospital systems. Basically, they provide the workforce. They also provide the technologies and the spinoffs. A region's got to be affordable and attractive. Most importantly, is a full spectrum financial industry that can really support these companies from their inception out of the universities and laboratories all the way through the life cycle. Having anchor organizations is important, i.e. companies like Genentech that really were an anchor in the San Francisco area way back when. Well-connected and networked. More importantly, there's a very, very long time cycle associated with building an ecosystem. We're talking 20, 30 years. So you have to have persistence and grit. So that's basically the introductory article in the journal. And now I'm going to ask Maura to take over and talk a little bit about, she interviewed a number of thought leaders and what her thoughts are and what their thoughts are. That is in a very nice article that she wrote in the journal.
Great, thank you, Art. We were thinking, actually, I'm going to talk also a little about some other articles in the journal. And we were thinking, what would be of most use to you, being university research parks. And I think I spoke to you guys in person at a meeting before a bio a number of years ago. So I hope that's true because I had a great time. Hope to see you all in person again.
We'll take credit for it.
All right. And but it was a really fun and sometimes arduous. It always is when you're putting together a special issue, because there's always a point at which you think you have everything and then you don't, and then you do, and finally the whole thing comes together. So it's a real journey, and we're just delighted with Rich and Brian's contributions, of course. The issue speaks for itself. One of the things we thought we'd kick off with, and this was an idea that Art had that he handed off to me. I have ideas and I hand it off to him and vice versa. So nobody gets out of this easy. And it was this thought leader insights. Could we have some general entrepreneurship writers give us ideas applicable to bio-entrepreneurship? Now, we always say this is science business. This is different. And yes, it is different. If we just look at biopharmaceuticals, 12 to 15 years, until recently, until the pandemic happened, $1 to $2 billion, 8 out of 9 drugs fail that go into phase 1. So this is different, and it's science. At the same time, could we get some insights? So went out to some familiar people and their books, like UC Berkeley professor Annalise Exanian. She wrote The New Argonauts, Regional Advantage in a Global Economy, very relevant. And of course, her classic Regional Advantage, Curse and Competition in Silicon Valley and Route 12. Of course, Boston, Cambridge, and San Francisco, all very interesting in this regard. Leslie Berlin, and also I should say her update was she wanted to talk about corporate size distribution, backlash against tech companies leading to new regulations. And this could also happen for biotech companies and the US-China business environment. Leslie Berlin from Stanford, she's the project historian for Silicon Valley Archives. She thinks it's more important than ever to study how we innovate and how we innovated and the people who innovate. Victor Huang and Greg Horowitz, you probably know Victor best, is the head of the Vice President for Entrepreneurship, long time at the Kauffman Foundation. And Greg, of course, is currently Director of Innovation at UCSD. They wrote The Rainforest. They talked about how you come together to build, building the next Silicon Valley or the next biocluster. And then finally, of course, Richard Florida, who wrote The Creative Rise of the Creative Class. Well, they all had something to do with COVID. COVID happened while we were trying to get this all finally together, and suddenly there's a pandemic. So nobody knows what's going to happen. One of the things I thought was very interesting is that he was saying, economically speaking, he felt the COVID-19 would hit cities in the developing world. So for how they fit into the whole, they're going to be the hardest. So we have to look at that and how do we support the entire global ecosystem. The last two sections, one is national labs, tech transfer, and educational programs, selected university programs, coupled with their ecosystems, and the role of accelerators, partnerships, alliances, and open innovation. Now, many of you, if not all of you, are co-located with one or more universities. So I thought I'd point out 2 articles. Certainly, we need universities to develop the science. That's the fuel, the engine that drives this whole bioeconomy. But we also need to develop bio-entrepreneurship, and that's part of the role of the university. So the first is Steve Ferguson and Lynn Johnson-Langer wrote an article from NIH, founding a national biomedical innovation ecosystem. And frankly, it's global. As you know, NIH funds more scientific research globally than any other entity. So his describing, Steve leading on that, and then Lynn on another area that I'll talk about quickly, about funding it and how you get that tech transfer out of NIH or fueled by NIH into innovation. And then Lynn, of course, is with FAES, which has been for decades supporting education right on campus at NIH. Then another article, which I wrote, multidisciplined ecosystem-centric bio-entrepreneurship. I just wanted to point out a couple of things from that. One is that we have a sense of bio-entrepreneurship education. You know, some people say, can we really do it? Well, we've been doing bio-entrepreneurship education for a long time, but how do we educate to support these environments? Now, I call bioeducation, entrepreneurship education 1.0, the old story of Herb Boyer and Bob Swanson, where Herb is in his lab at UCSF working along, and Bob Swanson knocks on the door and says, "Hey, I have money. You have let's make Genentech, you know, or Genentech." That's Herb's other joke. I don't care what you call it, just buy the stock. So the point is that it's not as simple as that. The pitches that you do to VCs at what point in your 12 to 15 year cycle, as an example, is one part of it. So we have some education that falls in that says we're going to do a lot of pitches, we're going to understand this. You know, there's also an idea that everybody starts up enterprise, and look around. How many CEOs do we have? How many people start up companies? How many people do that, given not only how many people are out there working in biotech, but how many people, you know, are capable of really doing it? Is that really their thing? And so then we get to bio-entrepreneurship education 2.0, which I think is also very important to research parks. And as we said earlier, you know, we used ourselves as an exemplar of getting from the lab bench to a registered product. So at bioentrepreneurship at USF, yes, we do have science, but we also have all of the disciplines that we've been able to identify to take you on that journey, be it law, be it MBA, be it ethics, be it information systems, be it regulatory issues, be it societal impact, any number of things that all feed into getting us from one place to another. And in reality, these people not only have to know their primary area, they have to know what all the other areas are so that we can all move together and work there in industry. So we take all the graduate students from any of the relevant areas, and they all learn together about how we do this. What are the essential things here? The idea is, you know, we took it out of engineering. We all work together, even though we have different skills, and we have to have all have the same big picture. So that's another kind of bio-entrepreneurship education. And it's not the only one. I work closely with, I'm a member of CIBER, SIBER, the Society for International Bio-Entrepreneurship Education and Research. We invite you all to participate with that. Just simply contact me and I'll bring you all in. And we're happy to work with your universities, professors to professors, to see what is possible and how we can support that, and how we can, in the FAES sense at NIH, supporting things on campus, how we can support that within your university park ecosystems and the ecosystem in which you live. So that's just some of the things that are in this issue. The issue speaks for itself. And with that, let me send it back to Art.
Well, let me just jump in here and say, if people have questions for Art or Moya or Richard, and I'm going to Moya, please put it in the chat. I'm sorry, put it in the Q&A, and then we will do some Q&A. But with that, I'd like to jump to Rich Bendis just to give a quick summary, because he identified certain characteristics of regions that were agnostic in terms of bio leadership, entrepreneurship, and I would just, Phil Hochberger from Northwestern in Chicago mentions that Nature Biotechnology article addresses the needs of women entrepreneurs, and his good link to an article about women entrepreneurs in biotechnology in the link. But with that, Rich, why don't you give a quick summary of the leadership characteristics that and other characteristics that you wrote about in the journal article that we co-authored.
Thank you, Brian. And Moira and Art, thank you for the invitation for us to contribute to the journal. And Brian is an excellent writer. I'm a great editor. And so with that combination, it ended up being a nice contribution as an article. So But Brian has the history, which is really interesting, to go all the way back and look at intellectual property, universities, Bayh-Dole Acts, and everything else that's happened in America to bring us to where we are today. And then what I tried to do is to give a little history related to what we call the biohealth capital region, BHCR, which is now the 4th leading biopharma cluster, according to Genetic Engineering News in the United States, and growing very rapidly. And talk a little bit about some of the factors that have helped create this as a vibrant biohealth ecosystem. And, you know, the other thing is it didn't happen overnight. It probably took 30 years, because if you really look at the evolution of how this region got started, it probably started both by federal government and academia. When you have NIH, which is the largest basic research institution in the world, in your backyard, with 27 research institutes and 6,000 intramural scientists and a $4 billion annual research budget that they have to work with. And then you have Johns Hopkins, the leading academic research institution in the world as well, getting about 2.2 billion a year. Then the University System of Maryland getting another 1.3. When you put all of that together, plus another 78 total federal labs, you have about $20 billion that's coming into this region to fuel basic research on an annual basis. And that replenishes every year and potentially grows. So at the end of the day, though, this region didn't start as a commercialization king. It basically was a basic research focused region for academia and government, and took a long time to transition to become successful in what I classify commercialization and entrepreneurship in the way that the ecosystem evolved. But when I describe what has happened here, as well as some other regions that I've studied around the United States and around the world, I came up with 6 different factors that have a dramatic impact on whether a region is going to be successful in building their cluster or their ecosystem. And the one I always start with is strong leadership. And the leadership can come in many different flavors. And I've worked in different regions where you had a strong mayor, you had a strong governor, you had a strong academic president, you had a strong industry CEO. And this was really a combination of factors in the biohealth capital region. We really started out with a county executive in Montgomery County who said, we have all of these assets in our backyard, but why aren't we getting more commercial success out of them, more tax paying, more jobs, when you have the FDA and the NIH and all the academic institutions? And so he put a panel together of industry leaders to study this. And at the end of the day, they came up with a number of recommendations. And what was really missing at that particular point in time was industry leadership. Industry was the beneficiary of everything that was going on at the academic institutions and the federal government, but they really didn't contribute much other than what they did for their own purposes. So we really are fortunate to have AstraZeneca, which was MedImmune before it was acquired in our region. There's over 4,000 employees here now, but they really wanted to build the ecosystem because they realized that the stronger the ecosystem was around them, the better it was going to be for them to attract employees, attract additional technologies, acquire companies, and retain and keep their people and grow within this region. So they became very active in the ecosystem. And in addition to that, that's when I got involved in forming Biohealth Innovation about 11 years ago, a private-public partnership. We have 21 board members, nobody from government. Everybody's basically from the private sector on that board, except for the president of Johns Hopkins and the chancellor for the University System of Maryland. But at the end of the day, the leadership that evolved really came from industry. And if you don't have strong industry engagement in your region, your state, your city, you're going to have a hard time succeeding because they really drive these ecosystems. And so leadership came a little bit from county government, but it was transferred to industry and a nonprofit organization, which was a private-public partnership, Biohealth Innovation, as we began to try to change the culture in the region 10 or 11 years ago from a research and government-led region to more a commercialization, entrepreneurial, and venture capital region. In addition to that, if you're looking at strong factors, you need to have talent. If you do not have a strong base of talent that can go into industry, into the research institutions, into the government research agencies to support the FDA, you're going to have challenges in growing the companies as well as your biohealth entities and institutions. We are fortunate. We have the highest per capita PhD and masters in life science education of any region in the United States in our backyard. A lot of that is due to the strong academia that we have, the strong federal government presence, but we have over 2,300 companies now. And if you look at the strength of how the PhDs and masters have evolved, we also have the ability to attract and retain a lot of people that are actually leaving San Francisco and Boston now because of the quality of life and the affordability that we have within our region, as well as the rapidly growing industry cluster that is growing right now. Another critical factor is capital. And we, as Art talked about flyover, we were a flyover and a drive-through region, even though we're on the East Coast and around major markets, Philadelphia, New York City, Washington, D.C., Research Triangle. It was not a destination for the investors. What's transformed in the last 3 to 4 years is that, number one, the academic institutions have gotten away from just doing licensing deals to doing startups. Johns Hopkins is now the 5th leading academic institution in the country with startups and venture capital that's coming to their startups. And if you look at where they were 5 to 8 years ago, they were really in the middle of the pack, being the leading academic research institution in the country. So that the University System of Maryland also had a transformation with their board and their chancellor saying, we want to focus on startups, not licensing. So they had a goal. We want 300 startups in the next 10 years. They really more than exceeded that. So they started focusing on startups that can attract capital rather than licensing the technology to other companies that were not in the region and generally would take the technology and go to other parts of the country with that. So that talent is extremely important, but also having the access to capital. If we look at where we were last year, we set a record with venture capital. In the first 5 months of this year, the record we had last year for the region has been exceeded already in the first 5 months. And we've also had 12 IPOs in the first 4 months of this year in the biohealth capital region, which has not really been what the history has been within the region. So you've got IPOs, investment bankers, venture capitalists, all congregating. And the other thing is the size of the investments now mirror what you see in Boston and San Francisco. We're starting to see, some $75 and $100 million Series A investments, which you traditionally would see in San Francisco and in Boston, but we're starting to see that type of investment occurring within the biohealth capital region. The other thing is, you need to have access to research facilities and assets. And we right now rank number 3 or number 4 with 30 million square feet of wet lab space in the United States in the biohealth capital region. If you do not have the wet lab space to accommodate the companies that you're trying to grow as well as trying to attract into your region, it's very easy for them to go and get lab space in other parts of the country. And so it's unfortunate, though, we've been so successful in the last couple of years, we only have 3% vacancy rate. The commercial real estate, if you look at what's happened in the last 18 months with COVID, they're at 17%. So what we're seeing is conversions of traditional commercial office space into wet lab space by some of the developers in order to accommodate some of the growth needs that we have. And there are plans for 3 million square feet of new space to come on board in the next 18 months within the biohealth capital region, which is critical. The other thing related to that space is it has to be affordable. The cost per square foot in Maryland, DC, and Virginia, half the cost per square foot of New York, Boston, and San Francisco. And so if you want to build affordable, high quality space, and have that accessibility to grow within that space as your company grows, it's much easier to do that at half the rate it would take in Boston or San Francisco by having that affordability within our region. And lastly, the sixth factor we talked about was brand awareness and marketing. You know, about 6 years ago, everybody thought about us as the DMV, you know, the Delaware Valley.
District of Columbia, no, District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia, DMV.
DMV,
Yes,
DMV, yeah. It's the Department of Motor Vehicles, Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV. Yeah, so DMV, I'm sorry, Brian, thank you. But at the end of the day, AstraZeneca came and said, do we need a brand for this region? And this is again driven by industry. They said, you know, you've got Silicon Valley, Route 128, Research Triangle, and we don't really have a brand. So should we have one? So they brought their marketing firm out of the UK, invested $150,000, had 150 people meet over a 6-month period to determine whether we should have a brand for this region. And by consensus, everybody came up with biohealth, which we think is a new term, which really replaces biotech and life sciences, because conversion or you know, the combination of pharma, biomedical device, and combining that with technology, AI, machine learning, and quantum, which really represents the biohealth industry in the future. Capital, which has a different double meaning, you know, the capital of the United States plus our capital that we use is with an A, is because you can't grow without dollars. And then region, and because there wasn't a long, strong history of regional growth in our area, but then the emergence, we have John Newby, I think, that was on this with Virginia Bio. We've had J Labs open up in Washington, D.C. Children's Hospital's been a magnet down there, George Mason. And then, of course, Maryland was the epicenter of all of this growth, but now it's become regional in nature between Maryland, D.C., and Virginia. So we have a brand. Originally, when Genetic Engineering News was doing their biopharma cluster ratings annually, we were called the 270 corridor. That's 5 miles in Maryland. And guess what? Our ecosystem is more than 5 miles on one highway in the state of Maryland. It's really more of a regional ecosystem, and it's now being recognized around the world as the biohealth capital region. So,
Rich, I think we're running out of time. I know,
okay.
But that was great. That was a great summation. So we really have to stay on time. I just want to ask all of our panelists, and others mentioned, you know, flyover. So what's one idea you can give to an area that's not Boston, that's not San Francisco, and not DC? Give us one thought or idea. Is it entrepreneurship? Is it more wet lab space? And by the way, we are going to have somebody talk about where wet lab space is being constructed. We have somebody from CBRE speaking afterwards. So give us.
It's all of the above, Brian. Now, seriously, and that's I was alluding to this earlier. Is that one of the things that we're going to be focusing on at the journal over the next year is basically making these connections better. What have we learned from COVID? One of the things that we've learned from COVID is how to cooperate and collaborate at a distance. And I firmly believe that a lot of these regions don't have to duplicate things that are already existing, that they can partner with other regions within our own country or even globally. So that's sort of where I see things going here. Is that let's learn from what worked with COVID. Look at all the partnerships that have been put together from U.S. firms, from the EU. We're going to be looking at some of the things that are going on in Asia. And my suggestion in an article that I'm currently writing is why not do more of that in the United States, so that you don't have to duplicate all of those expensive facilities. So that's sort of my 2 cents on what's coming next.
Okay. Moya?
I have a different idea, and it's very journalistic, but it's also very business. Follow the money trail.
There you go.
The example of San Diego 15, 20 years ago. Oh my God, they go up to San Francisco and they try to get money and they say, oh, you're all the way in San Diego. And
Yeah.
You know, and it's like an hour's plane flight away in the same time zone. And then what Biocom did is they set almost 40% of their current space aside and made an executive suite for venture capitalists. One of the first people through the door, the venture capital arm of Eli Lilly. No, it is exactly at the time the big pharma started their own, took out of the R&D budget into investment dollars, making everybody this, you know, R&D staff to them. They have people from all over the world, including San Francisco. Some of them could just come and sit in. They had all the others where, hey, if you're really coming, we'll set up shop for you. Make the money come, everything will follow. You've got capabilities.
All right, follow the money. Okay.
Follow the money.
Rich, concluding comment?
No, I agree with what they're saying. And when you talk about follow the money, I mean, in order to attract the money, you really have to have quality deal flow.
Yes.
And you know, if they have a physical presence, it's good, but they have to find things that are investable. So the term we use is finding ways to get people commercially relevant. It's way beyond proof of concept. If you can help entrepreneurs, scientists, small businesses become commercially relevant, where the market, it's scalable, it can be profitable, it's something that they know can be acquired or merged or IPO'd, and it does have relevance in the marketplace and is recognized as credible and validated by independent people, then you're going to have the ability to attract that capital to your region. So I would say we don't, you know, we have a limited team. We can't be all things to all people. And we're looking for strong entrepreneurial leadership, but we also want to see science and technology that has a large potential market that can be commercialized and be relevant to help cure patients' lives, but more importantly, attract investment into those businesses.
Perfect. Thank you, panelists. I greatly appreciate it. And we're going to now move on to our next showcase of state bioecosystems. And we're going to start with the Oklahoma City Innovation District. So with that, I think we have Katie Boren coming up. Yes, Katie.
Hello.
And Jesse McCool.
Hi. Thanks for having us today. Jesse and I are really thrilled to be here. And I'm going to start today by introducing the discussion about Oklahoma City's bioscience ecosystem by introducing the Oklahoma City Innovation District. It is a central hub that is located right next to downtown and the Capitol. It's an 850-acre campus that encompasses a multimodal business and research ecosystem. So you can see why we're introducing the Innovation District, because it is home to some of the central assets that make up our bioscience ecosystem. It has a mature core of biomedical research. It has yielded a history of commercial successes. It has state-of-the-art facilities and increasing capital investment. We will be speaking to some of those commercial successes and investments coming up. One of the additional investments coming in the form of state-of-the-art facilities is a new 400,000 square foot development in the core of the Innovation District that will house world-class biomanufacturing and research facilities and Innovation Hall, which will be kind of the public house of innovation. But it's adding to this cluster of assets that has yielded this result in the past, and that is uniquely poised to attract additional investment and opportunity. And Dr. McCool is going to speak to the specifics of the Oklahoma City bioscience ecosystem. Dr. McCool.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, so the next slide? Is there a way for me to advance this? Maybe to the next one? Yeah, okay, there we go. Yeah, so thank you very much. I just wanted to speak briefly about the Innovation District, touch on a little bit of the history in biosciences in Oklahoma, and then talk a little bit about the big picture and the future. My background is 20 years of biotech experience, about 15 years working in the CDMO space for API, so active pharmaceutical ingredients manufacturing. I moved to Oklahoma City in 2013, and I was pleasantly surprised to find the ecosystem in the state that it was. And as Katie mentioned, there's a lot of players already there. What's making a sort of what's surging right now is small funds that are popping up in the region. Investors that are coming together, venture capital, I know that was mentioned in the last talk. Venture capital firms are, are assembling in the region, in even Oklahoma City and Tulsa, creating biofunds to help pull research and innovation out of the universities, give it some seed capital, get it to a place where possibly they can go for an A round. So you're seeing funds, sort of longstanding funds like I2E has been around, OCAS has been around quite a bit, Presbyterian Health Foundation. These are sort of the historical players in Oklahoma that have really created this wealth, this amazing track record, which I think is on the next slide. But some new players like Echo Investment Capital, ex-oil and gas executives now doing healthcare investments. The assets that are there that the venture capital folks are aligned with are places where clinical trials can take place. Stevenson Cancer Center, Harold Hamm Diabetes Center, Oklahoma Children's Hospital. These are really critical assets that Oklahoma City is a very small town in a way, and it's easy to get connected and dialed in. And so venture capitalists can actually make some introductions of the sort of the sponsors of their drugs that they're investing in to researchers at these clinical trial centers. And these connections can actually speed up the movement of the drug through discovery and into development and get it into the clinical trials sooner than later. So that's a really important feature of Oklahoma City. The Innovation District is essentially kind of is in the middle between these assets and the financing that's in the downtown area. So the Innovation District really is creating this physical space for collaboration and connection between funding, source of capital, and source of clinical testing. And there's also residents like LabCorp, Purate, MHC, Siwa Biotech, Cytovance Biologics, a lot of resources that drug developers can utilize. And so VCs that are also affiliated with these resource providers can help make connections and really speed up and accelerate the movement of the drug through the clinic. Next slide speaks a little bit about the track record Katie already mentioned. There are some blockbuster drugs that have come out of the Oklahoma City area. Soliris from Alexion came out of OU OMRF. Celg1 with Solexis came out of OU OMRF. OMRF is the Oklahoma Medical Research Foundation. Myozyme came out of Novozyme Pharmaceuticals. That was also an OU innovation. These are acquired by massive pharmaceutical companies at this point, and all value, as everybody on this call knows, accrues to the product in the end. But along the way, in Oklahoma City did its job to get these ideas initially funded. This was early. All of these ideas were seeded early on from capital from Oklahoma City. Cytovance Biologics is biomanufacturing CDMO. This was co-founded by ex-Novozyme executives. That was acquired by Hepalink in 2015 for over $200 million. So a lot of value coming out of Oklahoma City, and the industry is growing. Next slide shows that a lot of the innovation on the far right-hand side is coming from the emerging biopharmas. So the emerging biopharmas are the research companies that are developing the drugs. They are not in a position to build manufacturing capacity. So the small biopharmas are the ones driving the biologics growth for sure. Next slide. There is a projected shortage of capacity for especially early clinical phase biologics. And you may have heard and become aware of this shortage during the sort of the peak of the pandemic in the US anyways. A lot of shortages mentioned in capacity for API manufacturing, especially for some of the novel drugs that are being developed to combat COVID-19. So the industry is growing. The biomanufacturing industry is growing, projected to grow 3.4x between 2018 and 2024. And so this presents a really unique opportunity for the Oklahoma City Innovation District, which is investing on the next slide in physical space and infrastructure to capture private sector dollars to invest in biomanufacturing in Oklahoma City. OKC has a very good track record so far supporting biotech, biologics, and manufacturing. And so there is a roadmap that that Katie Boren and others in the city are working on in the background to start building small scale API suppliers like Wheeler Labs, for example, scaling that up into beautiful facilities in the Innovation District that are already underway. But long term, we think that Oklahoma City has such a low cost advantage. We'll see a lot more biomanufacturing being built in this region.
Great. Is that it? Well, Jesse and Katie, thank you very much for the lot of exciting things happening in Oklahoma City, and we hope to learn more and follow the progress of the biomanufacturing and all the other activity happening in Oklahoma City. So our next state that's going to present is Mike Fleming from Delaware Bio. A lot of great things happening in Delaware. And Michael, I'm going to turn the podium over to you.
Great. Thank you, Brian, very much for the opportunity to have a few minutes here today to introduce Delaware Bio, who we are and what we do, and also to talk about the really incredible breadth and diversity of the organizations that make up our bioscience economy here in Delaware, which is the first state. Let's see if we go to the next slide. Just a quick word about our organization. Like some of the other state bio associations presenting today, we're really devoted to ensuring that we have a thriving landscape for life science innovation in Delaware, or biohealth, as Richard called it earlier. And we do that really in three core areas. One is through very high touch member support. Second is delivering great programs and showcasing scientific and business success. And then lastly, we certainly spend a lot of time really focused on advocating for policies and investments that are going to support Delaware's continued leadership, both on the national and the global stage. We are very fortunate to have a robust and growing life sciences industry in Delaware. We're a small state, but we have an exceptionally deep heritage in innovation and bioscience going back more than 200 years with the founding of the DuPont Company here on the banks of the Brandywine River. And of course, we're very fortunate to sit in a region with an immense talent pool, possibly one of the world's most significant talent pools for scientific research and the life science industry. If you look at where Delaware sits on the Northeast Corridor, right through from Maryland to Philadelphia and New Jersey. These numbers are a few years old. And in fact, we're in the process of working on a new report that is going to detail in more contemporary figures the industry's impact in the state. But as you can see, it's quite substantial, providing for thousands of good paying jobs and significant revenue to the state, which in our case, again, is really clearly proportionally possibly playing a larger role in our economy than in any other in the country. Our state is under 1 million in population. And of course, the knock-on impact and the benefit to so many other companies and in industries that support biopharma research in Delaware is immense as well. We could do the next slide, please, Vicki. So our sector in Delaware is really quite diverse, and our membership reflects that. Our members really range, running the gamut from leading global biopharmaceutical companies to academic partners and research institutions to smaller startup companies of just a handful of entrepreneurial scientists. And of course, we have many members of our association that work with and support the core bio members, including many law firms in Delaware that have exceptional world-class expertise in IP law and practice that here in the circuit court. If we could go to the next slide. This will give you a flavor of some of the companies and organizations based here, but with certainly a very global reach, ranging from Nemours, world-class leaders in pediatric research, the National Institute for the Manufacture of Biopharmaceuticals at the University of Delaware, companies like Incyte and AstraZeneca, other organizations, Delaware-based companies like Gore, that have thriving life science businesses. Go to the next slide, please. I think importantly, one of the things we're super proud of in Delaware is that our companies and researchers have played a really outsized role in addressing the pandemic. And our member organizations have been involved in every facet over the last year and a half of the COVID response, from developing vaccines and therapeutics to delivering and manufacturing PPE and testing and diagnostics. And that's something that we are super proud of how Delaware really led, I think, from a global standpoint. We go to the next slide. Lastly, I just wanted to call out a key facet of the success in the state of Delaware is really the unique collaboration that we have across our academic, private, and nonprofit research sectors and the state government, as well as our congressional delegation. And the Delaware Technology Park, which is led by my board member and former AURP President Mike Bowman, so ably led. They sit right in the middle of all that. The tech part has been such a key catalyst for nurturing innovation, making connections, and supporting business growth across the biospace, but really much more broadly across science and technology-based research and company growth. And I believe, looking forward into the fall of 2022, Brian, that Mike and his team and colleagues at the University of Delaware, I think, are planning in that fall to be hosting a conference on research parks. And I'm sure that will be a great opportunity, and they'll be very proud at that point to showcase their latest exciting project, which is a beautiful new state-of-the-art fintech center in the heart of UD's Star Campus in Newark. So thank you very much for a few minutes here. Yes. And we certainly look forward to hopefully hosting and seeing you in another year or so.
Yes, thank you, Mike. And Mike Bowman is, yes, an honored past president, past board member, and really one of the leaders in our industry. And we look forward to joining you and others, hopefully in the fall of 2022. Stay tuned in the first state as Delaware. Small wonder, other great nicknames for Delaware, but really fantastic stuff going on there, especially in with Nimble and the Nimble won our Excalibur Award for the great work they're doing in helping formulate new ways of manufacturing biopharmaceuticals. So thank you, Mike. Next up on our showcase of state bioecosystems is Rob Owen, Director of Bio Nebraska. Rob, welcome.
Hi, Brian. Thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity. I do have to say, I have to let people know that biosciences do exist in the flyover states, so that's always a good thing. Before I get started, I want to give a shout out. Oh, that's not working. To Dan Duncan, who is the Executive Director of Nebraska Innovation Campus, which is in Lincoln, and Dan is the previous president of AURP Board of Directors. So I want to thank Dan for all of his support of the biosciences over the year. So what is BioNebraska? It's a lot like what my colleagues have talked about today. We're a nonprofit trade association really dedicated to supporting, growing, and promoting Nebraska's biosciences. And as you can imagine, the biosciences in Nebraska are pretty diverse, as is BioNebraska's membership. We have over 90 members in the human health, animal health, agriculture, and industrial biotech sectors. And then absolutely having the University of Nebraska, who was really at the forefront of starting BioNebraska 15, 16 years ago, and its 4 campuses still spearheading and being an important member of BioNebraska. So who are some of our members? If you look in the human health area, we have Beck & Dickinson with over 3,500 employees across the state. They've made substantial investment in the state and continue to do so, which is great news. A lot of the work they do in Nebraska are manufacturing syringes and needles. And as you can imagine, with the demand for vaccines across the world today, BD has been certainly very busy in Nebraska. Another company, and it's my old employer, Streck, which is an Omaha company founded by an Omaha family many years ago. It's the world leader in clinical laboratory quality control products, blood collection tubes, and cell stabilization products. Is my guess that they probably have 70 to 75% of the world market in hematology control products, and that's an Omaha company. If we go quickly to animal health, 5 of the largest animal health companies in the world have facilities in Nebraska. As you can see them there on my screen, they're all located kind of in Omaha and the Lincoln area. Agriculture members, ADM and Bear Crop Science have facilities here. Bear Crop has almost 360 employees, and in fact, one of their most recent additions and facilities in Beaver Crossing, which is just west of Lincoln, and yes, that is a real city, is a state-of-the-art breeding and development station. And then if industrial biotech, we have Evonik, NatureWorks, and Novozymes, and they are all located on in Blair, Nebraska, which is about 30 miles north of Omaha. It's on the Missouri River, and they're all kind of located on the Cargill campus. Cargill set up shop there many years ago, taking advantage, I think, of the ample amounts of corn in eastern Nebraska and western Iowa. And as a result, then these other companies came in to build on that investment. So again, we're producing lysine, enzymes, polylactic acid, all up there in Blair. So it's a pretty vibrant industrial biotech sector. But as you can see, there's a lot of jobs here. And so what does that all mean for Nebraska? The average salary for bioscience industry in Nebraska is $70,000 compared to $48,250. So I think you can see why the decision makers in the state of Nebraska are really investing in growing the bioscience industry, not only with Nebraska companies, but recruiting heavily outside of Nebraska to bring those companies here and grow what we think is a pretty good, pretty neat area. So how are we doing that? What are some of the tools, I think, or some of the assets we have in Nebraska? One would be the Biotech Connector, which is located on Nebraska Innovation Campus in Lincoln, and it's 7,700 square feet of leasable wet laboratory space, opened in 2018. BioNebraska was part of the group way back then that kind of brought this to fruition, along with University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Department of Commerce, Nebraska Department of Economic Development. And it was truly an example of the kind of the public-private partnerships that are going on in Nebraska. We're a small state, but very well connected, and everyone knows everyone, and we're all kind of working for that shared common goal of growing Nebraska. So what do we have at the Biotech Connector? Kind of 2 things. You can come in as you're a startup, and you can get 6 feet of tabletop space or lab space there that you can work on and then share the other equipment around the lab. Or you can get into private suites, 2,000 square feet or such. That's kind of your own area. And really the goal is to get those companies in, the startups that need to kind of get themselves a footing, get themselves where they can get grow and expand and move on out. So then we can move in some other startups. So it's pretty exciting. And there's been some really nice positive companies that have come out of the Biotech Connector, which again is on Nebraska Innovation Campus, headed up by Dan Duncan. What else we have going on? There's a picture of the lab. The Nebraska Business Innovation Act, which is a state of Nebraska program that really provides funding to different level or companies, startups, smaller companies at different levels or different areas in their kind of life cycle. These are competitive grants. They're matching grants. So the companies that are applying for these need to have a little bit of skin in the game. And this has been a very successful program. If you're a small business and you're applying for a federal SBI grant, you can get up to $10,000 from Nebraska. And if you're in phase 1 and phase 2, up to $100,000. If you are working on a prototype or a proof of concept, here's up to $150,000 with a 50% match and up to $250,000 with a 100% match. There's a sizable amount of money being offered through these competitive grants. Finally, if you're a company and you are working with a Nebraska college or university, phase 1 up to $100,000, phase 2 up to $400,000. So there's real money there. And this is not only focused towards those Nebraska companies, but this Nebraska Business Innovation Act is really being used by our Department of Economic Development and our Chambers of Commerce to go out and recruit companies from other states. It's my understanding this Business Innovation Act, not every state has that. So if you're a startup, there's some real capital, I think, available through the state. The good news is this legislative session, usually the Business Innovation Act gets roughly $6 million in appropriations. And unfortunately, that money runs out in about 4 or 5 months. So Governor Ricketts in his proposed budget wanted to increase funding to 9.7. The legislature went one step further and increased funding 13.7 for the upcoming fiscal year and 14.7 for the next fiscal year, which was approved. So we are going from $6 million to $15 million in the Business Innovation Act, which is incredible funding. And this is why everyone's on board with this. If you can see on the last column over there in 2020, these are all cumulative numbers. There's been roughly $28 million awarded under the BIA. If you kind of scroll down, you see almost, 1,100 jobs created, average salary, $67,000, and economic impact, $527 million. For the state to invest $28 million and get $528 million back or $27 million back, that's a pretty good investment. And you can see why Governor Ricketts and the legislature are fully on board with the Business Innovation Act. So what's on the horizon that we're going to be using here to grow our biosciences? The University of Nebraska Medical Center, which is in Omaha, just recently announced a developer for a $45 million, 140,000 square foot multi-use project. It's going to include office space, lab space, commercial space. It's also going to house, for startups, obviously, it's also going to house tech transfer offices, commercialization offices from the University of Nebraska. That should be up and running in the next couple of years. And then finally, something that we call Project Next in Nebraska, which is with the Med Center. This is a proposed multi-billion-dollar federal disaster response center and state-of-the-art medical research and training facility. The big number there, creating almost 9,000 permanent jobs. University of Nebraska Med Center has been at the forefront of infectious diseases and biopreparedness, going all the way back to hosting Ebola patients. UNMC has the facilities and the doctors to do that. If you can remember, UNMC hosted some of the first US citizens for COVID-19 who were stranded on a cruise liner or a cruise ship last year. So Nebraska has those facilities, and the Project Next takes us to the next level. And folks around here are really excited at the state level, the city level, the county level. So those are the kind of things that are on the horizon, but that's what we're up to in Nebraska, trying to grow our biosciences. Any more questions or anything? And if you're ever in Nebraska, please stop by a Bio Nebraska Bio and Beers. We'd love to have you. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Rob. That was excellent. So the other state that's going to be presenting is Bio Utah.
There we go. Had to unmute. Sorry about that. Appreciate you having us on today. We appreciated being part of this last year, and we'll run through our slides quickly and tell you a little bit about what's going on in Utah. As most people are aware, Utah is one of the top states for business, is recognized as such year over year. Low regulation, low taxes, great lifestyle all contribute to that. These are some of the most recent recognitions we've received. And on top of that, is further evidence of the business climate in Utah. The 2021 Milken Report of best performing cities included 3 Utah cities in the top 10, along with 2 in the top 10 of the small tier cities. Another recognition of the significant business climate that is going on here in the state of Utah. Of course, the life science economy or life science industry is fueling that economy. We have over 130,000 direct and indirect jobs in the industry, generating 13 billion in direct and indirect GDP, over 1,000 companies in that. And as was the case in Nebraska, our wages are about 46% higher than the state average. Interestingly, a Techonomy report in 2020 studying the life sciences showed that Utah ranked second behind only the Minneapolis area in the percentage of workforce engaged in producing medical devices. And likewise, even more impressive is the fact that we are one of only 4 states, along with Massachusetts, New Jersey, and California, that have a strong concentration of jobs in pharmaceuticals, medical device and research, and testing and medical labs. All evidence of the thriving life science industry that is here in the state of Utah. And that's driven partly by investment, of course. And the Techonomy report also showed that among all the states, Utah was number 6 in per capita investment in life sciences. That has been borne out by over $1 billion that has been raised for Utah life science companies in just the last year, as can be seen here, some of those companies, a sampling of them. Another factor that drives strongly the innovation and entrepreneurship that drives the life science industry here is our universities. A recent report by Cambria Grove out of Seattle reported that University of Utah was the #1 tech transfer university in the country, and Brigham Young University was the #4 tech transfer university in the country. Utah State, who is part of that our university here, is also in the top 100. So we are very pleased that we have universities that are cranking out significant technology in the life sciences that helps to drive that economy here. And of course, at the University of Utah, being #1, the Pivot Center there, Partners for Innovation, Ventures, Outreach, and Technology, is a key player in that. They are the central innovation economic engagement engine for the university with industry, and perennially ranked in the top universities for tech transfer. Companies like Myriad Genetics, MPS Pharmaceuticals, BioFire, Recursion Pharma have all come from the University of Utah, and half of the life science jobs in Utah can trace back to some beginning with the University of Utah. Of course, another indicator of the health of your life science industry are the incubators and accelerators, which have really come online significantly in the last few years here in the state of Utah. Altitude Lab, which accommodates up to 30 companies, is a joint venture between Recursion Pharma and the University of Utah, and just announced today a $50 million fund that will help fund those companies coming out of Altitude Lab. In addition, we have the Atwood Innovation Plaza, another incubator at Dixie State University in St. George, Utah, our Bioinnovations Gateway incubator here in Salt Lake, and of most significance is a development that has been announced for the Point of the Mountain. For those not familiar with Utah, this is the existing prison site, which they are moving in the next 2 years, freeing up 700 acres of prime metro acreage that is going to be an innovation center, and the life sciences are going to play a significant role in that particular development. And we're very excited about the potential there. And the University of Utah also features accelerators in both orthopedics and in therapeutics. The purpose is ensuring faculty, fellows, and resident students and external collaborators to have access to innovation and commercialization resources to move early stage companies into commercialization. And those are, that therapeutic accelerator was just recently announced and is gaining great traction at the university. And of course, all of this is partly made possible by our University of Utah Research Park, which has been the anchor for life science development in the state of Utah for many years. And they have a plan in place, which we talked a little bit about last year, to ultimately build out to 2 million square feet of space. And that will be a significant addition to the life science industry here in the state of Utah, along with Point of the Mountain and some of the other accelerators that are here. And then finally, the Salt Lake City has recognized the significant impact of life science industry in its own boundaries, whereas Salt Lake City is home to a majority of the companies here in the state. And they have made life sciences their top economic development objective. As many have determined around the country, the biotech industry is a very desirable industry, and Salt Lake City is using some very significant incentives and objectives to expand that industry, leading from Research Park on the east, where companies can be innovative and entrepreneurial, to large manufacturing facilities out by the airport on the west side of the city. And finally, we hope you will hear this name more frequently, the term BioHive. We are one of the fastest growing life science communities in the country since 2012, defined by the number of jobs created. And the industry is working on a branding initiative called BioHive. We hope that in the future, as people hear that term, they will know what we are talking about, which is the life science industry in the beehive state of Utah. So we hope that you can see some of the great things that are happening here, the industry that is going on. And John, would you like to talk about what's coming next?
Absolutely. Thanks, Calvin. I appreciate that introduction. I just want to take a couple seconds as a board member of AURP and as the executive director of the University of Utah's Research Park. I want to extend an invitation to everyone today to join us in Salt Lake City, October 18th through the 21st for AURP's International Conference, specifically around life sciences. We're working on an exciting walking tour of Salt Lake City and some of the life science focal points that we have in our downtown core. And then we're also working on some exciting concurrent sessions and a track focused on the life sciences. So come out and join us for hopefully all of our first in-person conferences after this COVID experience. We're excited to share with you all of the exciting things we're working on here in Salt Lake City, Utah, and at the University of Utah.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan. Thank you, Kelvin. And we look forward to seeing everyone in Utah in October. Okay, so now you've heard about some earlier discussion about wet lab space and the lack of it in some parts of the country. And I'm pleased to introduce Ian Anderson, Senior Director of Research at CBRE Americas, who's going to give us an overview of what CBRE is seeing in terms of wet lab space affordability and other factors across the country. So Ian, good to meet you.
Good to meet you as well. So I was just going to bring up my slides here, if that's possible to, I'll just request the remote control. Excuse me, here we go. Thanks for having me, everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen properly at this point. My name's Ian Anderson. I'm head of life sciences research for CBRE. For those of you who might know exactly what we do, well, we focus on representing landlords who own a lot of, well, everything from lab R&D to manufacturing space, servicing the life sciences industry, as well as some of the world's largest pharmaceutical and biotechnology and other life sciences companies. So what I do, spend a lot of my time, is focusing on the drivers that are prompting demand for specifically lab and R&D space, but also the supply. So we can educate the owners of this space and also our clients, these pharmaceutical biotechnology companies that are seeking space for where they can find the best opportunities for expansion and so forth. So what I'm going to do here quickly today is go through some of the dynamics we're seeing across markets. As we look at it from a commercial real estate, from the built environment perspective, records continue to be shattered across the country in pretty much every single aspect regarding the supply and demand of commercial real estate. But I'll go through just two of the kind of larger drivers. I think you've probably seen this in some other presentations here before, but what I'm showing you here is just United States biotechnology research and development employment in the United States. And obviously this is growing by leaps and bounds. And this, why I show this really, or why I would begin any presentation like this, is simply because this is so tightly correlated with the demand for lab and R&D space. This is obviously prompting such heated competition for space in places like East Cambridge or South San Francisco or San Diego and likewise. And so that continues to reach a record. It's been on a tear for the last 5 years. I think the latest in March, we were tracking, it was growing by, I believe, 10% year over year. That continues to grow by leaps and bounds, causing demand to stay strong. I think also related, and probably some previous presentations, but the amount of capital flooding into this space, which subsequently causes demand for commercial real estate space to surge, is what we're looking at here is venture capital funding for life sciences as defined by CBRE. And it just continues to grow and defy our expectations. So in Q1 of 2021, saw an absolute surge in funding, and that at some point is going to equate to not only more jobs, but it's going to equate for more demand for space. So all these pharmaceutical, biotechnology, and other life sciences companies that are seeking space are just not going to have an easy time anytime soon. But I bring up the venture capital funding too, because it does affect the supply and demand of space going forward. So what I'm showing here, a little bit of a confusing chart, but I think it's important and probably of interest to some of the people on the call as well, and some of these other geographies. And it just shows the way this, the demand for life sciences, lab and R&D space has played out over the last several years throughout the country. So if you start from the left-hand side, what I did was I indexed the amount of venture capital funding, a rolling average, going into these different geographies. And so we started seeing in between 2014 and 2017 that the lion's share of venture capital funding to life sciences companies was going to these premier markets, as we call them. That's Boston, Cambridge, that's the San Francisco Bay Area, and San Diego. They were getting the lion's share. This is where this revolution was really taking off. What's interesting was we started to see it spreading in about 2017 through about 2019. And that's where the capital started spreading in some of these primary or secondary markets, we call them. This is in the mid-Atlantic, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Raleigh, Durham, Philadelphia, New York, L.A., Chicago, Denver. And then more recently, over the last couple of years, we've started to see a lot of the capital start to flood these, what we call more emerging markets. That's the Texas Triangle of Houston, Dallas, Austin. It's Atlanta, Pittsburgh, Salt Lake City that we just saw with a lot of momentum, and some of these other smaller markets. So this is starting to play out too in the commercial real estate sphere too. The demand continues to be as strong as ever in these so-called premier markets, but it's also absolutely spreading through these other, quote, emerging markets. And so if we look at the major markets we track, supply and demand fundamentals from commercial real estate, this is what we're showing here is multi-tenanted, leasable lab R&D space in these major markets. We track other markets, but these are the major markets we've been tracking most frequently over the last couple of years. And as you can see, Boston and San Francisco have the majority of the space in the United States, in this leasable lab space, 30 million square feet and above. What's interesting is that when you juxtapose the size of these markets against the vacancy, the amount of available space, which is these kind of reddish dots, you'll see that in Boston and San Francisco, the two largest markets in the United States for life sciences lab and R&D space, they also have less than 5% vacancy. That's an almost impossible market in order for companies to expand in without a significant amount of supply. And so for the most part, in the larger, more well-established premier markets, you will see vacancy rates sub 5%. Conditions are as tight as they have ever been. And on the right-hand side, you see some of these smaller markets with these generally higher vacancies. These are these markets that have started to see significant momentum over the last several years. They're changing rapidly. They have a lot of capital providers, developers extremely excited to meet demand. And as a result, you know, they're smaller size. They're seeing these properties come to market, and generally they're seeing higher vacancies. That doesn't mean there's necessarily any type of distress there. It just means that they're so small. There's these supply and demand imbalances that come out in our indicators. So these are going to be highly volatile markets over the next couple of years. And so as you can see, the availability of space for these companies to expand is extremely constrained, and it's even worse once you look at the real premier submarkets. These are these even smaller geographies, the trophy submarkets within the premier markets. So we're looking at just Cambridge within the Boston, Cambridge area, metro area. You're looking at just Boston, including Seaport or downtown in the Fenway. And then within San Francisco, you're not looking necessarily in the East Bay, but you're looking in the peninsula. And then in San Diego, it's 2 premier submarkets. If you want to be in Torrey Pines or in UTC or University Town Center, again, sub 3% vacancy rates. This essentially means there's, for all intents and purposes, unless you're a small company looking to expand, there's virtually no space for you to grow in. And then on the right-hand side there too, you can see some of the most current laboratory rents these companies have to pay. These are what we call triple net rents, which means they don't include any of the operating expenses. And so you see about $100 per square foot in Cambridge. That's not even East Cambridge. So if we were to drill down a little bit more into Kendall Square, you'd be even looking at higher rents. And so obviously the demand for space is exceeding supply. Developers are increasingly responding. What I'm showing you here is again in these major markets we track more frequently. This is the amount of new lab R&D space in the pipeline by these major markets. You can see Boston has the most amount of space under construction, nearly 6 million square feet. And within each of those bars, you can see the light blue is new construction. This is ground up, new development. And the purple are properties that are being converted from other uses. And so this is gaining a lot of traction in our industry, and that is with the specter of more remote work for people in the future, less uses of offices. Some of these office owners, many office owners, in fact, are looking to convert to higher and better uses. And so that's a source of concern for some of us, or many of these owners. In fact, on the right-hand side, the share of all development in the United States we're tracking are in these major markets for lab and R&D uses. Actually, the share that are actually converted spaces actually went down from mid-2020. So what we're thinking is one, we expect more of these office owners to try and convert to lab and R&D space, possibly flooding the space with more options. But more so, we're finding some of these owners are realizing that their space doesn't actually work particularly well and are pulling back. It's not as easy as they may have thought just to go from perhaps some type of suburban office building to a new lab and R&D building. And so what you're looking at here is we look over a little bit over time over the last couple of years. This is the pipeline of new construction in these top 5 markets in the United States, the total amount of life sciences R&D under construction. As you can see, just a couple of years ago in 2029, within Boston, Cambridge, San Francisco, San Diego, Raleigh, and New Jersey, there was about 4.5 million square feet under construction. Now there is about 11.5 million square feet under construction. So new constructions at a new record. However, on the right-hand side too, you'll see as we track the amount of that space that's under construction, how much of it has already been pre-leased, it's actually improved over the last 9 months. And so That's one real takeaway. As much as we've seen new construction, as much as we've seen these office owners wanting to convert their space to labs and R&D, we've seen the demand continue to keep up and maintain and exceed all of that supply. So that dark blue lines, greenish blue columns there, that represents the square footage of space that we're tracking from life sciences tenants seeking space in these major markets. So again, in these major markets, there's about a little over 11 million square feet under construction currently. However, we have clients, knowable clients of about 12.3 million square feet that are seeking space right now. So demand continues to exceed supply. That demand, those tenants seeking space, that amount of space being sought by these tenants has grown more than a third in just the past 9 months. So again, these are pretty staggering momentum changes that we're tracking here too, even surprising us. So because of that supply demand crunch, and I'm just finishing up here in the next couple of slides, we're continuing to see these rents, the average rents, continue to rise. On the left-hand side are some of the more recent changes in the average asking rents for lab and R&D space in these markets. And so in places like Philadelphia and Washington, DC, and Baltimore, two of the maybe primary, secondary markets we've tracked, we've seen some big upticks in owners asking for higher rents as those markets change pretty rapidly. And even in other markets like Boston, San Diego, and San Francisco, you're still seeing very sizable increases in rents. I mean, to see a 10% rise in San Francisco lab and R&D rents versus what they see in the office market is significant. And on the right-hand side, if we take a little bit of a longer view and you compare the change in laboratory and R&D rents versus conventional offices, you see how much the rents in labs and R&D have grown compared to conventional offices. And so just to wrap up, to summarize, this is not going to get any easier. The supply is at a record, but demand continues to keep pace and exceed that supply. So we expect this to not get any easier in the premier markets of Boston, San Francisco, and San Diego. We could expect it to continue to spread across the country, whether it's Chicago, whether it's Atlanta, Houston, Lincoln, Nebraska, what have you. Demand is going to continue to exceed supply. And so what I show you here to wrap up is a little bit of a confusing chart, but it's a pretty fascinating correlation between the growth in venture capital funding to the industry, which is that darker green line. And if we lag it a little bit, are the growth in jobs and life sciences jobs. And so the takeaway here is that essentially that the growth in venture capital funding that we see precedes job growth by about 12 to 18 months. And so as a result, we have seen the growth in venture capital funding in the United States spike significantly, as I showed you earlier in Q1 2021. And that therefore, based upon this historic correlation, is going to lead to more jobs in this industry in the next 12 to 18 months, which is going to be more demand for commercial real estate. So with that, I'm happy to, if anybody would like to reach out to me for further information to share some other things, but that's what I have for you there, Brian. Hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Ian. That was fantastic. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of follow-up. We appreciate that. A lot of great information there. And hopefully a lot of our parks will be able to absorb some more construction and build some more wet lab space. And speaking of places where they are building some new wet lab space, because I saw this in Phoenix, is Joan Walker from Arizona Bio, and she's going to give us a brief, because we're running behind, a very brief overview of what's happening with Arizona Bio. She wasn't able to make it earlier, but now she has some time. And as I said, AURP got its start in Arizona, so I'm pleased to welcome Joan and to give us your presentation about Arizona Bio.
Thank you so much, Brian, and it's great to join all of you today, and thanks for making room for AZ Bio. So as we move forward, I just want to give you a quick overview of what's been happening in Arizona. And what's really been the key driver has been our university activity and our research parks. And it's driving a growth rate of 15% between 16 and 18, which is double the national average for life sciences. Next slide, please. And what's also grown is the level of investment. So there's been over the last 20 years, $23 billion in investment in the Arizona life science sector. 80% of that was invested in research and healthcare infrastructure, and a large portion at our universities, resulting in 2018, $32.67 billion in economic impact just from the life science non-hospital sector. Next slide, please. And so this just gives you an idea of the concentration of things that have been built in Arizona around our universities in the last 20 years. And I'm used as a spotlight the Phoenix Biomedical Campus. This is a planned 30-acre inner city community with over 1.7 million square feet already under with people in it working, and 6 million square feet planned. Next slide, please. So what's new just in 2020 and 2021? You see the 850 PBC, or the Wexford, newest Wexford building on the campus. It is the first of a planned 4 buildings on that site. The ASU Health Futures Center that just opened in the last 30 days, 150,000 square feet on the Mayo Educational Campus. With ASU, University of Arizona in Oro Valley opened its newest incubator, and Creighton University is going to be educating both medical students as well as incubating and doing clinical trials on their new 190,000 square foot site. Next slide, please. So just as we just heard, it is a combination of 3 things that grow ecosystems. It is the people, the talent, it's the place, what we just looked at, and it is the purse. It is those dollars that go into the companies that give them the ability to grow into larger and larger spaces, which drive the demand for more and more commercial real estate. Next slide, please. So how is Arizona doing that? Arizona has done incredibly well in supporting its growth in its infrastructure, and we need to do better in supporting our companies. The ways that we're doing that today, the Arizona Innovation Challenge is a competition which puts out $3 million a year to early stage life science and tech companies that compete for those slots. We partner regionally with many of the people on this call with the White Hat Life Science Investor Conference, which we hold in Phoenix every 2 years. So you're all welcome to join us next year. And that conference started in 2014, and companies that have presented at that conference have gone on to attract $1.6 billion in follow-on capital. And that's what's really driving the growth in this market. And we have well-established angel and a growing number of investors who are paying a lot more attention to what's going on. And then lastly, we're going to do what Arizona's do, which is go out of the box. And we are currently working under support from an EDA grant to build AZ Advances. This is an endowment-based model where we are looking to raise $200 million that will then fund 10 million in early stage innovation in Arizona life sciences forever. So that's how we're looking to fill up that purse. Next slide, please. So if you're interested in seeing what's going on in Arizona, we are moving into Arizona Bioscience Week in October. Many of these will be on the inside the buildings we just talked about. But equally important, it is probably the first big event in our state where people will be coming back together and hearing not just about life-saving innovations, but whatever all their friends have been doing for the last 18 months. Next slide, please. So with that, I want to thank you and turn it back to our host.
Great, thank you, Joan. Greatly appreciate that, and thank you to all. This is where Arizona is where AURP is headquartered, and as I said, that's where we were founded. So we greatly appreciate the work of Arizona Bio. So the last thing, you've probably been reading a lot about federal initiatives, something called the Endless Frontier Act, but the Endless Frontier Act is no more. It has a new name, and the Senate is, I think, considering it right now. And so Jason Rittenberg from SSTI, our partner, is going to give us an update of how new federal funding will affect the states, especially in biotech. Is there going to be a rush of new funding? Will we have the space to do all this research? It's a really interesting time to see the policy and the funding opportunities coming out of Washington, D.C. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason to give us an update of what's happening on the Hill. Jason?
Great. Well, thank you very much, Brian, for inviting me today. Always great to be able to talk with the community here, and it has definitely been an interesting and exciting start to the year on federal policy issues so far. So great timing to be talking with all of you. Just for those of you who aren't aware of SSTI, we're a nonprofit association, been around for about 25 years, work with around 150 organizations, mostly governments, nonprofits, and research institutions around the country. Our focus is on strengthening initiatives to create a better future through science, technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. One of the roles that I have at SSTI is to staff our Innovation Advocacy Council, which is focused on improving federal policy related to innovation and working on both the Hill as well as with federal agencies, and very happy to have AURP's support in that effort. So thank you again to all of you and to Brian specifically. So a couple of things to talk about today. First, talking about Endless Frontier, the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, as Brian was alluding to, the new name that it has on the floor here. So this is up for votes today. It did, as of about 3:30 when I logged on here, they hadn't actually started voting on it, but they are expected to vote on a couple of final amendments and then ultimately the bill at some point before the Senate breaks today. Hopefully that will be going forward still. This is a really exciting, another exciting piece of legislation for the field, certainly, although unlike what we've seen in some of the other high profile legislation that has been passing so far this year, the majority of the bill is focused on authorization, not appropriation. So just want to flag that because there's a lot of great excitement, understandably, around the more than $150 billion in funding that's presented through the, actually more than $200 billion in funding that's going to be authorized through the program, through the legislation, I should say, but 50 billion of that is focused on funding the CHIPS Act, a lot of which passed previously during some legislation at the end of last session. And that portion is actually going to be funded, but the rest of it, the part that's focused on regional technology hubs and the NSF directorate and many of the other things that you've probably been reading about, all of that is going to be left for future legislation to actually appropriate. At least that's the plan at this time. So I do want to flag that for people because it's a crucial difference. Still exciting to have these authorization levels, but unfortunately, don't be prepared to start writing your grant applications just yet. So with that kind of status update on where things stand, just right at the moment, I want to go ahead and highlight a couple of things that I think are particularly relevant for the audience here that are exciting about the Endless Frontier Act, as it was at least passed through the Senate committee. There have been amendments to it, doing our best to stay on top of what all of those changes are, but just do want to flag that until it actually passes for sure, all of this is subject a bit to change, obviously. So first of all, one of the things that the bill does is identify 10 key technology areas that are going to be priorities for R&D investment, particularly through a new directorate for R&D at the National Science Foundation, as well as these key tech areas will play an important role in some of the other funding throughout the bill as well. Biotechnology, medical technology, genomics, and synthetic biology, that is one of the key technology areas identified in the bills that's going to provide for a lot of priority funding for innovation-focused initiatives as well as for R&D. So that's something there that is definitely an exciting part of this. The bill does establish a new directorate that will be more focused on development and on, in some possibly commercialization activities coming out of NSF. If you were reading about the bill early on, your understanding of EFA might be that the majority of the funding is going to be dedicated to this directorate. That has changed quite a bit through the process. So now the broader National Science Foundation will be receiving a large portion of the new R&D funding that's authorized through the legislation. Department of Energy, primarily for the national labs, will be receiving a significant portion of the funding as well. And a still substantial portion of funding is going to be focused on this new directorate. The directorate is going to be able to authorize a lot of activities, including new research centers, research activities, and commercialization and other types of innovation activities as well. Obviously, with this being NSF, you kind of anticipate that a lot of this funding will end up being focused more on the R&D side of activities, but that'll depend a lot on the ultimate direction that the final legislation as well as the actual staff in place decide to take. One of the pieces that at SSTI we are particularly excited about is funding for regional technology hubs. So there's an $8 billion section of the bill that would authorize a new regional tech hub section, as well as a new program to fund strategy and pilot types of programs. So regional tech hubs, the idea is to bring together a broad consortium of organizations, universities, state government, local government, labor organizations, industry representatives, quite a wide variety of players, again, to come together to have a developed strategy that is going to define what needs to happen in the region to work within one of these key tech areas to really advance innovation and new businesses, improve American competitiveness in a specific geographic region. So substantial funding, looking at tens of millions of dollars per year is most likely where this is going to land. At least 18 of these hubs would be authorized if the program is fully funded, and at least 5 years of funding would be authorized through the program as well. So really, this has the potential for pretty transformational projects on a regional level. New manufacturing USA institutes would also be authorized through the program. Obviously, there's one that's primarily focused on healthcare, health and biotechnology types of innovation right now. The legislation doesn't really exactly identify what all of these new authorized labs and institutes would need to be focused on. Certainly a possibility then that more could be related to medical and biotechnologies. And then one of the other sections of the bill is the National Engineering Biology R&D Initiative. This is basically authorizing a bill that had been introduced previously and has been added to EFA through an amendment. This is largely an unfunded mandate, but creates a structure to provide some new prioritization for R&D activity related to biotech throughout the federal government. It would create a new office at the White House that would be responsible for coordinating some R&D priorities with NIST, NSF, and the Department of Energy among the entities that would be responsible for developing plans to make sure that they were really focused on biotech, improving activities there, improving R&D outreach, improving the diversity within the sectors, and commercialization outcomes. So again, a lot of really exciting possibilities that could be going through this legislation. It's going to be voted on in the Senate. What we are waiting to find out is exactly what the House is going to decide to pick up. The House has already moved its own, the House Science Committee at least has already moved its own proposal to reauthorize NSF. That includes some consideration for some of the items that have been talked about here. The House is also preparing to think about new legislation that would reauthorize NIST and may include some elements of what we've been talking about and what the Senate is passing through EFA, as well as a bill focused on regional innovation economies. And SSTI's President and CEO, Dan Berglund, will actually be testifying about that tomorrow morning before the House Science Committee. Before I talk about the budget, Brian, I see you hopped on the window there. I wanted to see if you had a question or anything.
Well, no, I mean, this is all very exciting. You kind of hinted at it. What's going to happen with the House, and maybe more importantly, is this all going to be decided in conference in December, or what's the timing on? And it's authorization, I know, not the budget. But what's your expectation about when this will be put to bed in whatever version ultimately comes out? Is it
Yeah, so this has been really hard to prognosticate because there are so many huge pieces that are trying to move through Congress right now. It's an incredibly just unusual policy era that we're in right now. Obviously, I'm sure many of you have been seeing that there is also a multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure package that is attempting to be put together as well as move through Congress. So a lot of big things being teed up. And then of course, you've got the regular budget. NDAA needs to happen at some point this year. And we also have a debt ceiling to worry about before, so a lot of big pieces that need to move. The House, again, is working through its process of what's probably going to be at least 4, probably 5 bills that are going to match up to at least the bulk of what EFA is. So there's the NSF authorization, NIST, an Office of Science for the Department of Energy bill, a regional innovation economy that may be separate or maybe kind of packaged together with the NIST piece. And then probably something related to IP security. There are a lot of elements of that in the Endless Frontier Act as well. So most likely you're going to see at least 4 or 5 bills moving through the House. Some of those are already teed up, but most of those we haven't seen any language about at this point. So best case scenario, you're talking about weeks, if not months. So probably midsummer or so, maybe is best case scenario to see some House action. Like you were saying, Brian, looking at a conference activity in the fall is probably realistic, best case scenario at this point. And then that's going to get really jammed up when it comes to the actual funding process, because when you're talking about billions of dollars in authorizations, that's the size that would be hard to move through a regular appropriations process. And obviously the FY 2022 appropriations process is already kind of a little bit in progress here with the president releasing his budget and federal agency representatives already testifying regularly on the Hill about what the presidential budget priorities are. So then this becomes a question of how does EFA interact with those infrastructure deals, which are looking at fall to winter, probably best case scenario to look at appropriations. So a lot of moving parts at the moment. To get into just a couple of highlights that are been proposed and discussed for the FY 2022 budget. Speaking of that, a few things that we're tracking that I think would be particularly of interest for all of you. The White House has proposed $383 million for FY 2022 for EDA. That includes $45 million for the Build to Scale program. So these funding lines would include university centers, EDA's regular public works activities, and then Build to Scale specifically, of course, can focus on innovation and entrepreneurship programs, including activities in bio, obviously. There is funding proposed at SBA, $30 million across the Innovation Clusters program, the FAST program, which supports SBIR, as well as for the accelerators competition. That'd be $10 million for each of those is what the White House has proposed. New funding at NIST, $150 million in new funding. So that's above what the appropriations been in the past. It's about $166 million total in the White House's budget. And that would cover funding for 2 new Manufacturing USA institutes. So some opportunities for bioactivity there. And then when it comes to more at the R&D side and other programs that we see that support activity in this area, NIH at $51 billion. That includes $6.5 billion for a new ARPA Health Institute. The White House is proposing several new ARPA entities. You're probably familiar with the Defense ARPA, more commonly known as DARPA, and ARPA-E at the Department of Energy. The White House has proposed ARPA Climate as well as ARPA Health as part of the new budget. And then NSF at $10.2 billion in the White House's proposal. In terms of process for the budget, still early days. As I said, White House has put out its budget. You've got the agency heads that are testifying regularly before Congress. We still don't know what level of funding Congress is actually going to provide. This is the first year in a decade where there is not a statutory cap to the budget. So the number could technically be something around anything. We're hearing about $1.5 trillion though, is probably about what the next budget is going to be. But then within that, there's still a lot of work to do to figure out how much each committee and how much each agency is ultimately going to have as its funding before appropriators can really get down to these individual line item levels. But this is roughly at least what has been proposed from the White House. And it seems like there's a good opportunity for some increases and that Congress will be providing for some substantial increases for some agencies and programs in the next year. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have right now, and also feel free to follow up, and happy to talk with any of you offline as well.
Great, Jason. Quick question. So the big regional hubs, which I think a lot of our members are interested in as being a part of some, tech hub, whether it's bio or energy or whatever. Those are going to be, NSF has some experience in doing some of these large things, EDA. Would these be competed by EDA, and do they have experience in doing $1 billion tech hubs? I mean, that seems like a new area for them. Any comments on that?
Yeah, so this is definitely something that I expect to be a major issue during a conference process. The way that the regional tech hubs is written. So first of all, there are university hubs that will be part of the new NSF directorate, and that will be up to NSF. Those are authorized purely to this new directorate of NSF. The regional tech hubs piece is at the Department of Commerce, and the way that the Senate legislation has it written is that EDA will be responsible for the program with consultation with NIST as part of that process. I would not be surprised, based on some of the conversations we've had, if the House thinks about something that would be more at the commerce level, whether that means a new office within the Secretary's office or a separate agency that would be part of the Department of Commerce. That seems to be maybe where some of their thinking is. And again, that may come up even during the hearing tomorrow that's going to be about this bill that I referenced. One other point that I want to make on the scale question, the $1 billion proposal that you're referencing, that is how the legislation was originally written. As this regional tech hubs has developed through the conference and committee process, that has been scaled back a bit. So the legislation now allows for at least 18 hubs, so more opportunity for members to get involved in it. But with a minimum of 18 hubs, and then also taking the money down from 10 billion to now about 7.5, you're looking more probably in the 50-ish million per year would likely be where they end up being right now. Maybe a little bit larger, maybe a little bit smaller, kind of depends on exactly, again, where that final legislation wraps.
Okay, well, great. Questions from the audience, because you got a person with his finger on the pulse of what's going on. I mean, in general, this is a huge opportunity, whether it's the appropriations or the authorization. So the authorization, we would obviously, a couple of years down the road, but this is teeing up a lot of opportunities for research parks and innovation districts to be major players in our R&D ecosystem. Any questions in the Q&A? So Jason, what about the SBA, Small Business Administration? Many of our universities, and anything happening with SBIR, STTR, or the SBA program?
Yeah, so there were, great question. Obviously, a lot of these policies would have a pretty dramatic impact on the SBIR program. If you're talking about authorizing a new potentially $100 billion in R&D, you're going to have tremendous growth in the SBIR program. That's actually something that's recognized in the White House's proposed budget for FY 2022, that there be more resources provided directly to SBA so they can better manage the program if it is able to scale according to what the administration would like to see happen to increase R&D budgets. In terms of other SBA programs, though, we're not seeing a lot of movement, particularly on the Senate side right now. There were actually quite a few amendments that would have done everything from authorize the Innovation Clusters program, reauthorize the Federal and State Technology Partnership Program. Those were two amendments we worked on quite a bit, but then also making SBIR permanent, making changes to the SBIC program as well. Unfortunately, none of those amendments have been attached or advanced. We're not sure exactly why at this time, although, if you look at the leadership and ranking member of the Small Business Committee, it's probably not hard to imagine why there might be some pushback at this time in authorizing a lot of new SBA policies. So in SBIR, its authorization, I believe, runs through fiscal year 2022. So there certainly needs to be a lot of activity on that issue in the very near future. And that's something that I think we'll hear about a lot when the National Defense Authorization Act comes up later this year, and certainly next year if it doesn't get taken care of in calendar year 21.
So Dan Duncan asked a question about the rural component EPSCoR provisions in the Innovation Hub. And for those who don't know, EPSCoR was the authorization in NSF for states that don't perform as well as other states in NSF performance. It helped those states get more NSF dollars. And there clearly was an initiative, we talked about flyover states, to spread more funding to areas outside the two coasts. So what is your take on what's happening there?
Yeah, so first, as background for people, there are very strong protections in the Senate bill for the EPSCoR states. Again, things have been changing, but the last that I looked at what's happening on the NSF side, I think something like a third of the R&D funding at DOE, which had its own EPSCoR program, and at NSF would be going to EPSCoR states. That's a large percentage that would be authorized there. And then on the regional tech hub side, these regional consortia that need to be focused on implementing the regional tech hub strategies. About a third of those would need to be focused on EPSCoR states as well. And then there's also a special provision in there that would need to make sure that an EPSCoR state that also has a city that is no larger than a small city needs to be included in one of those consortia as well. And that actually speaks to my direct answer to this question, which is that I think it is very likely to see at least many of those EPSCoR provisions remain in the bill, because this is something that is very strongly supported on the Senate side, particularly from just to be frank, the Republican leadership. The amendment I referenced about the one EPSCoR state with a small city is from Senator Thune, and he's obviously part of the leadership on the Republican side. And so I think this is something that'll be a priority and be likely fought for pretty significantly during any conference process.
And the money that went away from the NSF directorate to the Department of Energy labs, is that likely to remain? I mean, that was the Senate. Is the House likely to concede on that, or?
Yeah, great question. So there's definitely room for the House to concede on it, in part because the authorization level is higher in the Senate than it was for what the House is proposing. So I think it will be relatively easy to align those ideas. That's in theory. Obviously, things can change. But as I mentioned, one of the bills that the House's Science Committee is expected to work through would be focused on the Office of Science and Energy. So they're certainly very strongly committed to the Department of Energy's science-focused mission. And so I think they'd be supportive there. I would think that maybe we'd see more negotiation around what percentage and what amount goes to the Department of Energy rather than taking it out altogether. While that provision was being debated in the committee in the Senate, I believe it was Chairwoman Cantwell, made the point that the U.S. Competitiveness Act and other legislation that has been significant and moved through the committee in the past has always provided for the national labs as well. And so she was making that kind of historical justification for the bill, and I'd expect that to carry.
Well, great. Any other questions from our audience? I want to thank Jason for taking time. I know we went way over. This is our networking time, but I think this is a great discussion, and I greatly appreciate what you've been doing, and good luck to Dan on for his testimony tomorrow, and keep us informed. And we greatly appreciate your work at SSTI and elsewhere. So with that, we're scheduled to go to 4:30. It's been a long day. Any questions or comments? Or Vicki, are we going to go into a general session, or Diana?
No, I think we're ready to wrap up.
Okay. Well, thanks, Jason. Thanks to all of our panelists. Thanks to all of our speakers. And we hope to see you in Utah in October for our conference in United We Rise. We will meet in person and online. Registration opens summer of 2021. I want to thank Mark Romney and Rich Bendis, my co-chairs of the BioHealth Caucus, and have a great evening, and see you hopefully in Utah in October.